All right, at 6:30, let's call to order this regularly scheduled meeting of the Belvedere City Council. May we begin with a roll call, please?
Councilmember Cooper. Present. Councilmember Wilkinson. Present. Mayor Lynch.
Here.
Vice Mayor Mark.
Here.
Councilmember Chemnitzer. Here.
We will proceed this evening in accordance with the previously published agenda, with the exception that we are going to alternate items 6B and C. So what is currently 6C regarding traffic safety improvement will go after 6A, and then 6B concerning police officer hiring will go last in order under other scheduled items. That brings us to agenda item 3, reports and presentations. Do we have any reports from our fellow council members? Councilmember Cooper.
Good evening. I just wanted to report that I'm on the Tiburon Belvedere Library Board Committee, and I spent 2 mornings a couple of weeks ago attending their long-term strategic planning sessions. The library is reaching out to all residents on the Tiburon Peninsula, and there will be a survey available online beginning Monday, October 16th at beltiblibrary.org. And I encourage everyone to fill in the survey and give them your feedback so they can meet your needs. I also attended the September Belvedere Tiburon Joint Disaster Advisory Council. October is Emergency Preparedness Month, and Fire Marshal Lantier shared important information on fire prevention at home, that by simply closing your bedroom door, close when you doze, you gain needed minutes for escape and fire response, and your chances for survival increase dramatically. So if you sleep with your bedroom door open, don't. Also, Public Works Director Boyd reported on evacuation route arrows that would be placed on our streets to help residents if an evacuation is required. Our newest representative from Belvedere, Adam Gavzer, brought up the continued need for communication to all residents regarding any possible confusion, since these routes are actually disaster specific. There are times we must shelter in place, times we would evacuate up onto the island, and times we would evacuate down to the lagoon area. It was clear that details on different natural disasters, actions that should be taken, and how this all fits in with our safety element needs some additional work. Everyone should be registered on Alert Marin, and this Saturday at Zielinski Park from 11 to 3 is the Get Ready to Go event 94920 to learn about how to be disaster ready. Each of us needs to prepare because of our high density and extremely limited way to evacuate by roads. We all need to understand that residents in Belvedere may be isolated for up to 5 days, maybe even longer. So personal preparation is key. That's all I have for tonight.
Thank you, Councilmember Cooper. Anyone else, Vice Mayor Mark?
Yes, thank you. I wanted to just quickly update the council on the work of the housing element revision working group. And forgive me, I'm going to read it just so I be accurate about it. The revised draft housing element update will be available for the city review by the end of this week. The housing element working group will then review and revise this draft and prepare it for public comment. I believe we are scheduled to post the draft for public review in the November 2nd through 9th window. That will be followed by a community open house and a joint planning commission city council meeting to review the draft and receive further public comment. Our goal would be to resubmit this draft as soon as possible following these meetings and subsequent revisions. Further, as directed by the Department of Housing and Community Development, the city is preparing zoning amendments which are necessary to accommodate the housing capacity described in the revised housing element update. These zoning amendments primarily address a boardwalk site and aligns our downtown zoning with Tiburon's recently modified mixed-use zoning for their downtown district. Additional zoning amendments include updating existing zoning to reflect newer state provisions and clarifying density bonus and objective development standards when properties are developed with specific levels of affordable senior or workforce housing. Our goal is to have these zoning amendments public review for these in November and December, and hope to adopt by early 2024. Additionally, CEQA initial study has begun and will be published by the end of the year. I wanted to thank everyone who's worked on this group, particularly Rebecca, and very specifically Councilmember Cooper and Planning Chair Carapiet for their tireless work on this update.
Thank you, Vice Mayor Mark. Any other reports of council this evening? Yes.
Very quickly, I am the alternate BCDC Commissioner for the North Bay Division of Counties, and I attended the BCDC Subcommittee on Sea Level Rise. I just wanted to let the council know that this subcommittee now exists. BCDC is taking a very close, deliberate, well-studied look at the effects of sea level rise on the bay shorelines. And they want to be very much aware of local concerns, and the District 3, that's our district, Southern Marin, is currently represented by Janelle of Sausalito. And if anybody has any other concerns, they can contact me. And that's Janelle Kellerman. I'm sorry, I should have said first and last name. If anyone has any concerns or thoughts or comments, they can certainly contact me for that purpose as well. If you want further information, you can find it on the BCDC website.
Thank you, Councilmember Kemser. Councilmember Wilkinson.
I just wanted to comment briefly on Marine Clean Energy. So I sit on the board of Marine Clean Energy as one of my appointments as part of the City Council, and we just had our annual retreat, which was very interesting with good and bad news. Marine Clean Energy is now 95% carbon free, which is 17 years ahead of state goals, which is pretty tremendous. But as demand for electricity ramps up over coming years, as we move away from gas and we all move to electric cars, that is going to be a struggle in terms of meeting that demand. And it is, I think, important for community members to understand that the real struggle with clean energy is the extreme level of demand between 4 and 9 p.m. Every day, when essentially we're drawing from a dirty grid at that point of day because we've got such strong demand. And I think many people are not aware that in terms of pricing, you pay a lot more for energy as a customer of MCE between 4 and 9 p.m. So it's in everybody's interest and the climate's interest to reduce consumption during those times. Thanks.
Thank you, Councilmember Wilkinson. Was there any discussion, if I can just follow up, at that meeting about the prices of batteries, both at utility scale and smaller scale?
Not a lot. I mean, no. The elephant in the room with clean energy is the ramp up in demand that will be coming in the next 20 to 30 years with no capacity to meet that demand, and batteries alone are very unlikely to solve that problem. It's a problem for the United States, the world over, particularly in California, where there is no conversation around increasing nuclear. It's a very difficult challenge that we face going forwards.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other reports from council? Right. Not seeing any. Thank you for all of those. We'll turn now to item 3B, the city manager report. Mr. Zed.
Thank you, Mayor Lynch. I do have a few updates. First, our fire risk reduction project started on West Shore Road last week and is still ongoing. Crews are reducing the amount of flammable material on the lower slopes of that hillside. This included work by PG&E to remove about 12 hazardous trees on city and private property and removal of brush by contractor crews. So to date, approximately 100 cubic yards of material has been removed. The remaining work includes erosion control measures at a handful of those locations. We're expecting the project to wrap up in about a week, but I do want to give a shout out to Tony for overseeing this important work. We all love grant funds, so I'm happy to state that the city was found eligible for around $8,000 in free money from PG&E and Marine Clean Energy. The purpose of the grant was to swap out the water heater at the city's corporation yard. Our device at the corporation yard qualified to be replaced with a hybrid electric heat pump water heater. The new heater will help reduce greenhouse gas emissions and is 50% more efficient than the old one. So I'm looking forward to reduced energy bills as well. For those interested, partial rebates are available to Belvedere residents through PG&E and MCE. I encourage anyone who's interested to visit the Marine Clean Energy website for more information. Regarding the seismic upgrade project to the city's levees, the final EIR is near completion, and staff will be looking for a date, most likely in November, to hold a public hearing to present that document. As part of CEQA, the purpose of the final EIR is to allow engineers and staff the opportunity to respond to any questions made during the initial public hearing. The report summarizes those comments and addresses them individually. As we approach a public hearing to certify the EIR, staff will distribute the responses at least 10 days prior to the hearing, giving the public another opportunity to review. And on those lines, we always strive for maximum transparency here at City Hall. So of course, residents will be notified that the document will be posted on the city's website, along with physical copies here at City Hall and the library for reference. And that's all I have at this time.
Thank you. Any questions for Mr. Zadig? Yes, Councilmember Cooper.
I wondered, Robert or Tony, how do you help with any falling rocks, et cetera, on what you've trimmed off of West Shore? Because that's quite a haircut over there.
Tony Boyd, Public Works Director. Thank you for the question, Councilmember Cooper. Yep, so I'll start off by saying that we consulted our city's geotechnical engineer about removing vegetation from the slopes. And he said that we should only remove vegetation from the lower portions of the slope. So that's what we're doing. Actually, not much further than about 30 feet from the road. But in some places it is very steep, and there are clearly falling rocks and soil that's visible now that the vegetation's gone, bare soil in some places. We're planning on putting down straw wattles and jute netting that will get stapled into the ground in those places. And then we'll also be seeding with an erosion control mix of seeds. Yep.
Thank you. Any other questions for staff based on the city manager's report? All right, seeing none, we'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here who wishes to address agenda item 3B? Seeing none, can I ask a clerk if we have anyone on Zoom?
Mayor Lynch, I see none.
All right, we'll close the public comment. I want to say I neglected to have public comment on agenda item 3A, city council report. So let me backtrack and ask if there's anyone here who wishes to address that agenda item. Not seeing anyone. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
I see none.
All righty, we'll close public comment for that and turn now to agenda item 3C, our police chief report. Chief Whoop.
1 second, please. All right. Thank you, and good evening, Mayor Lynch and council members. Tonight, I'm pleased to present the Police Department's third quarter report for 2023. I always like to start off by stating that the hallmark of the police department is our unparalleled personalized service that allows our residents to enjoy a very unique quality of life. Starting off with our quarterly RIPA data, 2 individuals were detained based on 2 calls for service by our residents. One was for solicitation activity and one was for mental health. Ultimately, one was given a warning and the other was held for mental observation. The perceived racial composition consists of 2 Caucasians. During this quarter, the police department handled 564 incidents, which included 4 Part 1 offenses for larceny and 3 Part 2 offenses, and which are also highlighted in bold. The remaining 557 incidents are classified as all other incidents. Most incidents handled this quarter were related to calls for service from our residents. Also during this quarter, the police department received 4 citizens appreciations and assisted Tiburon PD on 2 occasions. But more importantly, 25 coyote-related incidents were reported during this quarter as well, which is a little slight uptick from last quarter, which is expected given the season. And as part of our ongoing professional development, the PD personnel attended online and in-person training that were either mandated or for knowledge and skill enhancements. And also during this quarter, we updated 2 lexible policies in accordance with the minute laws, and they are detailed in the staff report. During this quarter, let me go back there real quick. During this quarter, 1 PD personnel resigned from the department while another is out on workman's comp. The good news is that we've been actively recruiting to fill the recently vacated position. And lastly, the PD continues to be active in community events, which we always take great pride and joy in being part of. And this concludes my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Wu. Do you have any questions for Chief Wu at this time?
I have one. With respect to the other incidents, how do the community members contact how does the communication come to the police department for those requests for service?
They either call the police department directly or they call dispatch directly. If they call the police department directly and no one's at the office to pick it up, it automatically rolls to dispatch. So either way, it goes straight to dispatch, more or less. Or if the officer initiates, picks up the phone at the police department, they will notify dispatch so an entry could be made. Or sometimes the residents would come to the police department to report it directly as well.
So over the quarter are several hundred contacts going through dispatch?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Wilkinson.
I hope I'm not putting you on the hook here, but of the 25 coyote incidents, do you have any sort of context in terms of whether they were just sightings or whether there were any actual interactions?
Yes, if you give me 1 second.
You obviously anticipated.
So approximately 10 during this quarter were observed, and observed meaning that there were signs of presence, either vocalizations or signs of scats. The other one are actual sightings, and those were 14 actual sightings or actual reported incidents. And then the other one was a report of a non-physical altercation with pet. And so that collectively, that makes 25. And they're all reported in through either the hotline or the website.
Thank you.
I just wanted to follow up on that number. I just wanted to make sure people understand that we still only have 1 to 2 coyotes. So they may be seen a little bit more often, but there are not more of them. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Cooper. Any other questions for Chief Wu or staff at this time? Not seeing any. I have a question following up on coyotes. And this may be best directed to Councilmember Cooper or maybe Mr. Zadnik. So it was helpful to hear, I take it from our expert, Ms. Dimitrik, that we're still only counting 1 to 2 coyotes in town.
Thanks to the Belvedere Community Foundation, we have our video cameras.
Our cameras.
And we're able to actually see them on I would say approximately on average 3 times a week. And we have never seen more than 2 at once.
Okay. And we did such a tremendous amount of work this year to put together the coyote management plan, the wildlife management plan, and which is sort of like a playbook on how to deal if we do see a seasonal uptick in sightings, activity, or the numbers. And what, can you just give us a sentence or two about how mechanically that's going to be put into place? In other words, if we see that uptick, do we reach Ms. Dimitrick?
Yes.
What do we do, and how do we
The
start
simple
implementing
answer
and
is
rolling out the solutions?
SOS.
Yeah.
We put up the bat signal, and our wonderful coyote whisperer, Rebecca Dimitrick, will be up here at a moment's notice. Actually, I have to say that in all the time that we've been dealing with the coyotes and learning about them, I finally saw my first one last week. So one of those reports is from me because I saw my first coyote. I'd never seen one before. So it was kind of exciting. And I don't know if it was a female or male, but the minute it heard my friend and I talking, it skedaddled away very quickly. They really don't want to be around people. And it was kind of fun. I wanted to haze the coyote, but it left too fast, so I couldn't practice. But yes, we would call Rebecca immediately if there's any change in number, visibility, more often, different times of day. So far on our camera on West Shore, we pick them up approximately 3 to 4 a.m. So they're pretty much in the dead of night when they're out. We have had a couple of people see them as early as, I'd say, 9:30, 10 p.m. But mostly it's quite late at night.
And I assume we're working with staff to be prepared to roll out newsletter updates and that sort of thing. If we do see an uptick, if we expect it to be seasonal, just a refresher reminder on good habits and hygiene around the house and community and backyard.
We try to put a coyote hint in each of our monthly newsletters, and that will continue until it doesn't seem that we need it anymore. But so far, we've had information to share that's new every time.
Mhm.
So that'll continue. And we do have a very good list of everyone who has either called in or filled out the form or called a police officer directly. And if we see anything change, we will immediately contact that group of people because they are the ones in the areas where they seem to hang out.
Great.
So we have that available to us as well.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Any other questions for Chief Wu or staff on the police report? Not seeing any. I'll open it up for public comment. Anyone here wishes to address agenda item 3C? Not seeing any. Ms. Clerk, do we have any on Zoom?
We have Mr. Rothman.
Alrighty, thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Due to my own inability to use the computer very well, I'm not clear whether this is the item that was much later on the agenda where the staff report noted the hiring of a new police officer. So I'm going to make the assumption that this is that item and that it got moved forward. Is that correct?
Bill, if I can help you out here, the item you're referring to is agendized as 6B. And at the outset of this meeting, I notified everyone that we're going to swap 6B with 6C. So the issue, if you'd like to speak on that, we'll be addressing it as the last in order under agenda items 6, other schedule items.
Thank you. I apologize. I apologize for my computer problems, but thank you. I'll speak about it then. Thank you.
Very well. Not at all. Thank you. Madam Clerk, anyone else who wishes to address this item?
We have Jenna Watson.
Excellent. Jenna?
Hi, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. I just wanted to say that I was one of the people who filled out the form to submit a coyote sighting. And I have to say it was very user-friendly, even for a Luddite like myself. And I was also very appreciative that Councilmember Cooper called me to follow up on the sighting. I think she wanted to determine whether the coyotes that we had seen were the same general description as others that others had seen. So I just wanted to say that from my perspective, it's been very nice, and the follow-up was very appreciated. Thank you.
Terrific. Thank you, Jenna. Madam Clerk, anyone else on Zoom?
I see no other hands raised.
All right, we'll close the public comment on that. And that brings us to agenda item 3D, which is a presentation by Christina Rourke regarding the Marin Countywide Electric Vehicle Acceleration Strategy.
Yes, good evening. I'm Christina Rourke. I'm the Sustainability Coordinator for the Marin Climate and Energy Partnership. And I have a presentation for you, so let me share my screen. And not sure why it's showing this view. So I'm here tonight to present the Marin County-wide EV acceleration strategy, which was developed by MCEP, of which Belvedere, of course, is a member. It was also funded by the Transportation Authority of Marin. Our goal is to accelerate EV adoption throughout the county. There are targets, excuse me, all of our cities and towns have adopted climate action plans, and they have EV targets embedded in those plans. So this EV strategy is meant to support our climate action plans. It's not a one-size-fits-all plan. It actually provides a suite of actions that a jurisdiction can take, and so you can actually identify actions that are relevant to your city and that have not yet been completed, and then develop a work plan from those actions. So we developed this plan with the help of a subcommittee. They first started off by developing these guiding principles. We did quite a bit of outreach before we actually drafted the plan. We reached out to and conducted stakeholder interviews with all of our jurisdiction staffs, including public works staff, because they're going to be charged with implementing many of these actions, including electrifying municipal fleets and installing EV chargers on public land. We also interviewed regional and state agencies, looked at other plans, and looked at guidance from regional and state agencies as well. We really wanted to choose the best practices and make sure that they were included in the strategy. These are the guiding principles. They are shown in the back of the plan. I won't read them all at this point in time. So just some highlights of the existing conditions that we go over in the plan. Right now, more than half of emissions, community-wide emissions, come from the transportation sector throughout the county of Marin. And in Belvedere, it's a little bit lower. It's around 40% in Belvedere. Of that, passenger vehicles are responsible for about 80% of transportation emissions. So it really is critical that we reduce emissions from passenger vehicles. And a lot of the plan really is directed to passenger vehicles, although we do touch on medium and heavy duty vehicles that are in municipal fleets, as well as electric bicycles and scooters. So right now, there are about 8% of all vehicles registered in Marin County are electric vehicles, and that's higher in Belvedere as well as Tiburon. You're at about 13%. And they are increasing every year. There was a 25% increase over the previous years. We're at about 15,500 zero-emission vehicles in Marin. We are countywide double the rate of the state, so we're doing pretty well. But there really is more to go. We have pretty aggressive targets in our climate action plans, ranging pretty much from 25 to 45%. For Belvedere, your target is for 35% of all registered vehicles that are traveling from Belvedere to be zero emission vehicles by the year 2030. So the chart on the left here is showing the growth rate that will be needed in order to reach 35% which is coincidentally your target. And so we need to sustain an annual growth rate of 21% to get to that 35%. And for the past 3 years, we've actually been averaging a 22% growth rate. So we are kind of on target. The chart on the right is showing what we need for new sales targets in Marin, which is the green line, versus what the state is projecting. The state does have, you probably are aware of the new state regulation that will require all new car sales to be zero emission vehicles. These are light duty vehicles by the year 2035. So right now, the state, that actually is a little old. The state is at 25% of all light duty vehicles are CEVs. And in Marin, it's even higher. Right now it's at 38%, which is actually quite good. And we are above where we actually need to be in order to meet that 35% target. So we're doing well, but our targets are higher than what the state is. So we need to do more than just what the state is doing. We can't just rely on state regulation to get to our targets. There was a study done by the CEC that identifies charging needs, and in Marin, we have over 1,000 public and shared private chargers. The number of chargers in single-family homes is undoubtedly much higher. About 71% of the housing units in the county are single family. In Belvedere, it's higher, it's 89%. In a way, the single family market kind of takes care of itself because most of those homes are owned, they're owner occupied. And people who, once they purchase a ZEV, they are incentivized to install a charger in their home. So really the need is for multifamily charging. And there's a big opportunity here because a lot of our cities and towns have pretty high, including Belvedere, have pretty high regional housing needs numbers that they need to address. There's probably going to be a lot more multifamily housing throughout Marin County. So to ensure that those new developments have electric vehicle charging opportunities for all tenants is really important. Tam did a study back in 2019 where EV chargers were needed. A lot of these have actually been built, but we do, of course, need more. I think the important thing is that level 2 chargers, which can charge a vehicle in probably about 8 hours, fully charge, those are really needed wherever a car is parked for a long time, like a school parking lot, anywhere. Sometimes if somebody parks and then they take an alternative form of transportation. So smart stations, ferry terminals, park and ride lots are all really good places for public chargers. And then level 3 chargers are especially needed off of like Highway 101, anywhere where somebody can pull off, quickly charge, and usually under an hour and then be on their way. But we also need chargers, again, near multifamily buildings, because especially as existing multifamily buildings, those are very difficult to retrofit. So if there is a charger in a parking lot nearby, we know that people will park their car there, charge it, and then walk back to their unit. We did a survey of municipal fleets. Not a big surprise. What we found is that usually the passenger vehicles are the ones that have been converted to an electric vehicle. These passenger vehicles are typically used for site visits or for meetings. But most of our fleets in our municipalities are using special purpose vehicles like police vehicles, or patrol vehicles, fire departments. And then, of course, in our public works fleets, there's a lot of heavy duty vehicles, and there's just not enough options at this point to electrify, but hopefully there will be more coming soon. So we identified a number of barriers to EV adoption and acceleration of EV adoption. The reason to do this, of course, was to identify strategies that would address these barriers. The strategy itself has 36 actions in 4 areas. Again, our expectation is not that a jurisdiction is going to implement all of them, but that they would choose what is relevant to that jurisdiction. We did provide a sample work plan in the appendix for that purpose. So there are, again, 4 actions under conduct robust community outreach and education. I'm just going to highlight a few of these. This for this one, the cities and towns can just use their typical communication channels, websites, webinars, newsletters are particularly good at getting the word out and promote the benefits of EVs and also the existence of rebates and other incentives. Under accelerating public charging infrastructure, we do recommend that all of our cities adopt a model reach code, which would be more aggressive than what the state requirement is for EV charging. In particular, the state only requires charging in multifamily buildings. It's about 40 to 45% of spaces need charging, whereas the model reach code that Marin County has adopted and many of our jurisdictions have also adopted it actually has charging, EV charging that would be ensure that there's charging for all tenants. So 85% of those spaces have the capability of installing a charger, and another 15% would actually have EV chargers for that development. This is showing that status of that reach code and this jurisdictions that have already adopted this. The EV reach code is also, it's kind of tied with the all electric construction code. And so the majority of our jurisdictions have adopted that code. And then under increasing municipal fleet electrification, our recommendation is that our jurisdictions all adopt a goal to convert 100% of the municipal fleet by the year 2030, and then to develop an actual plan to do that, look at the replacement schedule and ensure that it's in your capital improvement plans. And then lastly is to support and advocate for policy and funding to accelerate EV adoption. So for next steps, we've been going to all of our cities and towns and asking them to simply accept the report, and if the council chooses to direct staff to incorporate, either to complete the work plan or incorporate what's relevant to the city in your own climate action planning. And with that, I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Ms. O'Rourke. Do you have any questions for Mr. O'Rourke at this time?
Thank you very much. I noticed a couple slides back under the all electric construction code, a number of the municipalities had paused enforcement. Could you describe that?
Sure. So the city of Berkeley has been sued by, my understanding, and I'm not an expert in this, but let me tell you what my understanding is, by a restaurant association. So their all electric was also, it requires restaurants that rely on natural gas to electrify. The county code, my understanding is that they do allow an exception for restaurants. So that was upheld. It's being appealed. So the jurisdictions, the county actually has adopted that all electric code and is enforcing it. Some of the other jurisdictions are choosing not to. Although they've adopted it, they're not enforcing the new all electric code until this is resolved in the courts because it's on appeal.
Thank you.
Other questions? Yes.
Good evening, Christine. For those of you who may be unaware, I just want to thank Christine for coming tonight. Ms. O'Rourke was a huge help to us in our climate change, our climate action plan update, and worked with our committee and helped us all learn a lot more about EV. I do have one question about the multifamily housing. And under new state housing laws, in some aspects of multifamily housing, local discretion has been curtailed, to put it mildly, particularly with respect to parking requirements. And how would that impact the requirement if we were to enact an ordinance that required a certain percentage of EV availability when we really have less discretion over parking than we used to?
That's a really good question. I think you're referring to, like, if a multifamily building is within a ferry terminal, for example, and doesn't have to have provide parking, and under some circumstances if you could require, that's a good question. I think maybe a good one for an attorney to answer.
Well, thank you for taking a shot at it. And once again, thank you so much for your help on behalf of MCEP, helping us on our climate action plan.
Yes, Councilmember Wilkinson.
Hi, Christine. I had a few questions. The first one was, I think you said that cities should have a goal of having all electric fleets by 2030. And my question there, because presumably that includes police fleets as well. What thought went into that process in terms of what happens during PSPSs if they are for a number of days and your electric vehicles are not charged?
So, well, we aren't, one of the things that we do look at are microgrids. We have an action in there to develop microgrids so that they can help in a PSPS event.
Okay, so it's assuming you've got battery backup, basically.
Yeah, exactly.
And then as we mentioned earlier, the bigger issue of climate issues of there not being enough supply of clean energy potentially for this ramp up in demand. And so I guess I was curious, during this planning process, did the people involved think about what strategies could be invoked to encourage consumers with electric cars not to charge when you're drawing from a potentially dirty grid, which is clearly true now at certain times of day and maybe increasingly true as demand goes higher, because it's a demand supply issue. And so it's very nice to encourage everybody to move all electric. If you don't have the energy on the grid to keep that clean, it's pointless. And so I was curious whether that was part of those discussions.
Yeah, absolutely. Demand response is really critical to making sure that it is clean. And also, you had brought up before about battery storage. One of the things that's also in the plan is bidirectional charging. So these batteries can actually be used if they could, more so in the future, not necessarily currently, although the Ford F-150 does have bidirectional charging capability if you purchase it, but you'd be able to draw off the battery during the evening when you have that dirty electricity, and then charge it when the grid has solar and wind and it has cleaner electricity. So it actually could be a good solution for the battery storage issue, is using EV batteries.
Yeah, I mean, my understanding right now is that would void your warranty. And so they've got to move past those issues as well. And then the other question I had, which is more to do with transportation, bigger transportation, busing, etc. Again, there we have a small yellow bus program, and we've investigated moving to electric fleets. And part of the issue there isn't that the supply of the buses doesn't exist, is that we can't get high-speed lines in to charge those bigger vehicles. And I was curious, again, what is the strategy there at the county level, working with PG&E, et cetera, to bring in those higher powered lines?
Yeah, so the plan itself doesn't address buses, and particularly because they're operated, and I don't know about your yellow school bus if it's operated by Marin Transit. So we did not address that. There is a rule, the ICT rule, which requires those transit agencies to purchase electric buses, and so presumably the charging issue will, it will have to keep up and keep pace with the demand. We are also have been at MCEP in conversations with PG&E representatives, and we do understand, and they understand too, that there's going to be a lot of demand coming, especially in Marin, because we're electrifying faster than other counties, and that we need to be sure that there is enough, not just grid capacity, but distribution capacity to service all of that. So
I hope they fix that problem, because they've got a 10-year delay on getting energy onto the grid right now. So let's hope some of those things can get fixed in time for this massive increase in demand. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. O'Rourke?
Yes, I do have. Thank you. Following Councilmember Wilkinson's a comment. So I'm also our TAM commissioner, and Christine gave a presentation to TAM this past month, actually, explaining that part of the outreach was to come to each of the communities, such as she is here tonight, and getting the feedback, such as we just got from Councilmember Wilkinson. If I remember correctly, part of the conversation at TAM concerned the fact that there is funding for additional EV chargers, and if I'm not mistaken, they're in the process of locating the best sites for the chargers that funding will support. And so in your conversations with TAM, I think it might be worthwhile to mention that some of that siting should be to support the school buses in Marin County. And I'm not sure that was part of the conversation, but I think as we move forward toward electrification, this is the time to make those requests.
Yes, I will definitely pass that along.
I mean, just to some feedback there, we are one of many yellow bus providers that all provide yellow bus services within the school district within Marin. And there is the company that we contract with, or actually another company, has literally electric buses sitting there, and no school district wants them because they can't charge them. And so the charging issue is a really significant one. And so I just worry that we're focusing too much on rushing everything to having these shiny cars that don't actually solve the climate problem because of all of the other issues that we're talking about. So I think it's a really holistic problem, and I worry that we're misleading people about the impacts of what they're doing by buying an electric car if we don't also educate about when you should charge them and all of these other questions which many people just aren't aware of. So I think there's a big education process, and I think there's a lot more than just encouraging people to buy an electric car.
Yeah, the outreach and the education is critical. And as far as our targets are concerned, I mean, our greenhouse gas reduction goals for most of our cities, and Belvedere included, is 40% below 1990 levels, requiring 35% of all passenger vehicles on the road to be all electric or CEVs by the year 2030. So it's just starting the process. It's not 100% of them. But it's, even if we just address the passenger vehicles, at least we would be able to hit our intermediate targets. And then, as time goes on, hopefully, the technology and the capacity will catch up, and we'll be able to hit our zero net energy, zero net emissions targets for 2045. But yes, it's a big goal.
Thank you very much. Really appreciate the presentation. Very thoughtful. And I'll open this up now for public comment. Is there anyone here who wishes to address this item? Seeing none, I'll ask Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
Mr. Rothman.
Okay.
Thank you very much. I hope that I understood correctly that the chargers that you're planning to install are called level 2. I believe that there are chargers that charge about twice as fast as the ones that you're installing. If I'm wrong, please tell me. But if I'm right that they can provide much quicker charging, and one of the main problems in encouraging people to get electric cars is it takes some time to charge them. And many of these chargers are going to be placed in places where there are not now chargers. And usually when you're first doing something, if you do it the best way, it ends up being less expensive than doing something in not the best way and then upgrading it later on, like remodeling something that's complex often is more expensive than building something right the first way if someone's building a house. So could you, if I'm right that there are chargers that charge much quicker, could you please say why it is that you've chosen to have the chargers that do not charge the maximum rate that even now is available? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. Do we have other commenters on Zoom?
I see none.
All righty. Thank you. We'll close the public comment and move forward to agenda item 4, the consent calendar. The consent calendar consists of items that the,
Mayor Lynch, before we go
Yes.
forward, and I thought we were going to have a comment period at the end of her presentation. She suggested that we may need some ordinance amendments. And if the council would like me to work with Rebecca on any of that, Rebecca worked with Christina O'Rourke on the she worked tirelessly, I should say, with gratitude on writing the portions of our climate change update on electrification. So I just wanted to offer that if the council wants us to look, staff to look further in that, I'm happy to work with Rebecca on that and bring anything needed back to council.
thank you. That's a very generous offer. I wonder if, we'll definitely take you up on that. I wonder if it might make sense to prepare just a brief report that could go on the consent calendar or something like that for next month, if we can get it done, that would just identify, Mr. Zadnik, what codes we might be revising, any other changes that we need to implement that are structural. And thank you, Ms. O'Rourke. I did pick up on that, and we hadn't planned for a discussion this evening on that, but I do think it's good to do it. And thank you.
Apologize for the interruption.
Not at all. Thank you for raising it. But I think that if we need to have that discussion, I think we should have it soon. I think it should be agendized. And I think if we can get a brief staff report that would just run through and frame the issues, that might be the best way to do it, because I imagine my colleagues will have very good insights on what we should be doing, what we might be able to pass on, and the best way to approach it in all events. Do you think that's feasible, Mr. Zadnik?
Yeah, of course, I'll speak with Rebecca about this, but it sounds feasible.
All righty. And Councilmember Kemensur, do you feel like that's a sensible way to do it?
If staff time is available, certainly,
Yeah.
I'm happy to help it. And I think it is important to follow up readily. So if we can find the time, I'll schedule that.
Excellent. Well, thank you for volunteering and suggesting it. Any other comments or suggestions around that approach? All righty, good. Thank you again. We'll close that agenda item and address the consent calendar. Let me begin by asking if there's any public comment on any of the 4 consent calendar items. Is there anyone here who wishes to address any items on the consent calendar? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone online?
Mayor Lynch, I see no hands raised.
All right, we'll close the public comment and bring it to council and ask if any council members wish to remove any items from the consent calendar. Seeing none, I'll entertain a motion to adopt the consent calendar in its entirety.
I make a motion to approve and adopt the consent calendar items for A, B, C, and D.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
Thank you. All in favor? Aye.
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 Any opposed? None. It passes unanimously. Let's move now to public hearings. Item 5A, introduction and first reading of an ordinance for the city of Belvedere to amend Title 8 regarding reusable foodware. And do we have a staff report?
Yes, you do. Thank you, Mayor Lynch, and good evening, council members. The item before you tonight includes an introduction and first reading of an ordinance of the city of Belvedere to amend zoning code chapter 8, health and safety, adding section 8.09, reusable foodware. The foodware ordinance would require foodware to be reusable or compostable and prohibit plastic foodware. The proposed ordinance would cover all entities selling prepared food to the public in the city of Belvedere, including restaurants, grocery stores, delis, bakeries, carryout, farmers markets, food trucks, and any other business that requires a health permit. Staff has discussed this ordinance with 2 of the 3 food vendors in the city of Belvedere, and they already mostly comply with the ordinance and are willing to be fully compliant in December. Staff will continue to reach out to the 3rd business with hopes of connecting with them soon before our December meeting. Enforcement of the ordinance would begin on December 15th, 2023. As outlined in the ordinance, the city of Belvedere authorizes the county of Marin to enforce this ordinance on behalf of the city. With that, I will pass the presentation to Dana Armanino, a principal planner with the Marin County Sustainability Team, who will go over the details of the ordinance, and she is joining us on Zoom.
Good evening, council members. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can. Good evening. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for inviting me to present tonight on the county's reusable foodware ordinance. As mentioned, I'm Dana Armanino. I'm a sustainability planning manager with the Marin County Community Development Agency, and I'll just share my screen to get this started. Can you all see the screen?
Yes, we can.
Excellent. So to date, the county and 9 jurisdictions in Marin County have adopted the county's reusable foodware ordinance. By all adopting the same ordinance, the county's Environmental Health Services Food Facility Team can conduct proactive and cost-effective technical assistance and enforcement countywide. Plus, countywide adoption would level the playing field for all food facility operators and make education and outreach easier than a piecemeal approach with conflicting rules. Rebecca already highlighted the main features of the ordinance, but to go over them again, enforcement for most jurisdictions in Marin will begin November 10th, but for you all, it will become after you fully adopt the ordinance in December. But really, even after that enforcement date, focus is going to be on proactive education via existing food facility inspections and technical assistance. We really want to focus on providing assistance to businesses, and we have a team that's working on that, and they also provide grants to help businesses with the transition. Some other key features of the ordinance includes an emphasis on reusables. Reusables are the best option and will be required for dine-in foodware. For takeout foodware, the materials need to be fiber-based or aluminum. No bioplastics will be allowed, and I'll get into detail about that in a later slide. Some other features include limiting takeout accessories like straws and utensils to by request only, and a 25-cent fee for disposable cups. Similar to the bag ban fee, the food facility operators would retain the fees collected. So I want to spend a little bit more time on why the foodware ordinance doesn't allow bioplastics. And there's several reasons. There's a wide range of bioplastics, bio-based materials, and biopolymer materials on the market right now. Not all of these products are the same, and nor do they break down the same way. And these materials look like plastic, but then also have markings that say biodegradable or compostable, but then may not be fully compostable except under very certain temperature conditions. Ultimately, these products can end up contaminating both the recycling and composting streams. It can be very confusing for businesses and consumers to know which is a better product and what ultimately goes in what bin. And if these products end up as litter, as can happen with single-use disposables, they can still clog our storm drains and end up in the bay and ocean. And once there, they can still behave like regular plastics in the way they decompose, because again, some of these need the higher temperatures of commercial compost piles in order to fully break down. And then finally, and more specifically to Marin, WM Earth Care, Marin's main composting facility, is certified by the state to produce compost that can be used on local certified organic farming operations. Therefore, to avoid contamination of the compost stream, WM Earth Care does not accept bioplastics. Currently in Marin, bioplastics must go in the landfill. We've heard from other jurisdictions outside Marin that their compost facilities operators are starting to take similar steps, so we're not alone in this. We will continually work with WM Earth Care to identify what products and product types are acceptable in their compost operations. And so should conditions change, the county would consider updating the ordinance. But for now, bioplastics must go in the trash bin in most areas of Marin County. To assist businesses with making that transition to reusables and compliant materials, the county maintains an online purchasing guide that will be updated quarterly with available compliant alternatives that are accepted by WM Earth Care or are recyclable. The ordinance also states that if a compliant product is not currently commercially available, then that product will be exempt from the ordinance. For example, currently hot and cold beverage and soup cups are not available without a plastic liner inside. So we have exempted those products. Food operators can still use those products, but they must be disposed of in the trash. They're not currently compostable versions that are accepted by WM Earth Care. The county will monitor the product availability and update this list annually and give businesses plenty of warning before any enforcement action is taken on a product that is removed from the list. Again, the goal of the ordinance is to provide clarity and consistency for our businesses. It's not to punish and fine them. We're really focused on that proactive education for businesses. Before I conclude the update, I just wanted to circle back on two things. First, I want to reiterate again, even once enforcement begins in December, should you all choose to adopt, the county is very focused on education. This initiative really is trying to provide clarity for customers and businesses on what is trash, what is recyclable, and what can be composted here. There's currently a lot of confusion out there, both for businesses and residents who generally want to do the right thing, but don't know what goes where. I get that question all the time. And second, our goal in sharing this offer with cities and towns is to provide that clarity and consistency countywide and to level the playing field for all food facility operators in Marin County. We are offering to conduct the enforcement via the county's Environmental Health Services Food Facility Team on behalf of cities and towns that choose to adopt the model ordinance and MOU. The cost for this enforcement would be incorporated into the food inspection fees, so there would be no additional ongoing cost to the cities or towns. Thank you so much for giving me this time tonight. I'm happy to answer any questions if you have them. And we have a lot of information for residents and the food facility operators at marincounty.org/foodware. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do we have any questions at this time? Ms. Cooper, Councilmember Cooper.
I have one question. It's very hard when you're like in the city offices and staff, and if you have a big event, the easiest thing, of course, is to get bottled water in plastic. And I wanted to ask you what, other than the alternative of using a glass or, you know,
Pitchers
and glasses, which I know is ideal.
Mhm.
I was at an event that used water in a box.
Mhm.
Are you familiar with that? And does that, is that meet your standards?
No, because it has to have that plastic film. At
Okay.
least the brands I have seen, technology is changing constantly, but the brands I have seen does have to have that kind of thin plastic film to retain that water. So that would also go in the landfill. You know, there are aluminum can water options now and more coming on the market. So that would probably be the best alternative, or glass, both of which can be recycled.
Okay, thank you very much.
Yes.
Dana, thank you for the presentation. That was very interesting. I'm one of those people who stands by the recycling, trying to figure out what goes where. So, but a question I had was, there's obviously a long list of exemptions right now because the disposable, the biodegradable product isn't yet available. I'm just curious, that seems like a large exemption list. And so how much impact is this policy actually going to have? Meaning it seems like those exemptions cover most things that are would be relevant for this policy.
I agree. The list is extensive right now. Again, we wanted to help the businesses with the transition and not overwhelm them. There are advances have been happening even since we adopted the ordinance. The little ramekin type sauce cups, There used to not be options. Now there are many options. So those will be coming off the exemption list in February. Technology and products are advancing. The more jurisdictions that adopt ordinances like ours are pushing the industry to really work to fulfill those niches. So I think you'll start to see as the years go on, that list start to, narrow as we get more and more options at commercially viable prices. But I do think that there are many options out there. There are bowls that can be used, aluminum trays that can be used, the clamshells, those types of things. You will start to see an impact, I think, soon.
And then my other question was, does the county and the municipalities, would they have the right to also impose bans in relation to supermarkets? Because you just see going through the supermarket how much plastics are still used in supermarkets. Do they have that authority, or that's not something that would be that is within scope?
Unfortunately, not at this time. We can do enforcement on the deli operations because we do have enforcement authority over prepared food that is made in that deli. But products that are brought in from outside the county or even outside the state, we do not have the ability to regulate, as it's an interstate commerce issue. Hopefully, maybe we can be working at the larger level with the state on something like that.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. That was very interesting. Thanks.
Yes, Vice Mayor Mark.
Hi, thank you so much for the presentation. I do appreciate it. Two questions, if you don't mind. First is, can you just generally describe or mention the alternative product? Are they comparable in price to the existing use? And number two, you mentioned, and I understand that your primary goal from an enforcement perspective is education and service and help in moving businesses to these alternatives. If and when this enforcement becomes more draconian, what measures would those enforcements be?
So on the comparable price, we are finding fairly comparable prices on the alternative products. The aluminum bowls are pretty comparable. New products that are starting to come out, they're a little bit higher priced. We won't take them on the list until there's a variety of options and that price comes down. We won't take them off the exempt list. We're trying to be very aware of that. And then we do have grants available for businesses that want to transition. And then one other thing is a reminder that for dine-in operations, it does require reusables, which will ultimately lead to cost savings. We found even in a little taqueria in San Jose that made the switch, they saved $14,000 a year not buying reusables. They used a grant to buy their initial reusables. Comforts Food over in San Anselmo also saw cost savings when they switched to reusables for dine-in. So we're hoping to see some balance there. Regarding the enforcement part, if we have to move beyond the education outreach, and again, we're going to give the businesses every chance to receive the education and then make the transition. We don't want to take an enforcement action, but the ordinance does outline that if a business does not remedy the issue, then there is the ability to do a citation.
I have a quick question for you, and this is just reflects my poor education in civics, I guess. But the county has this program through the Environmental Health Services, and it's doing the enforcement. And I guess my question at the highest level is, does the county lack jurisdiction to enforce its own ordinance in each of the municipalities so that each municipality has to adopt its own ordinance?
Correct. The Environmental Health Services Division has authorization from the state to enforce the state food code. And that's the extent of our ability to enforce outside the unincorporated area. And so if a jurisdiction such as Belvidere wanted to add anything beyond the state food code requirements, they would have to adopt their own ordinance and then the MOU that would provide authority to the county to enforce on their behalf. And that's what is being presented tonight.
But is the county enforcing in unincorporated portions of the county? Is it enforcing essentially the same ordinance that we're being asked
Yes.
to read tonight?
Yes.
But that can't be imposed by the county into incorporated sections of the county?
That is correct. The county of Marin adopted this model ordinance itself for our own businesses located in the unincorporated area, so that we gave authority to EHS to enforce the ordinance, but we do not have the authority to enforce it beyond our jurisdiction, except as at the request of other jurisdictions.
That's helpful. I appreciate that. I get confused these days. The state seems to be making a lot of decisions for us at the local level. So I was surprised that they weren't able to do this. One question I had about the model agreement is in section 4, responsibilities, subdivision B for the county. It says that the county will provide updates to the county, to Belvedere of the county ordinance or modifications to the enforcement of the program. And my question to you is that something that would be considered an amendment under section 10? In other words, section 10 limits amendment to this agreement, but it sounds like under subdivision, 4B, the county could just tell Belvedere of changes in its own ordinance or in the enforcement of the ordinance. So how do those two intersect?
So we would notify Belvedere if we wanted to make any update to the ordinance, but we would not be able to, and we could update the county unincorporated version of the ordinance, but we would not be able to make that modification or enforcement on businesses located in Belvedere until you, as a council, adopted a similar update. So again, it would be up to you all. We would, as we did with this ordinance, we would work with all of the jurisdictions that are participating in the program to make sure any future amendments are acceptable to everybody. Because again, we want to avoid that piecemeal approach.
Thank you. That's very helpful. I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Councilmember
one
Kenseth.
question. It makes thank you for that explanation. That was a great question, and it just indicated the importance of uniformity throughout the county. I think is very sensible. Can you just, as a matter of information, tell us what differences, which would be sort of anomalies, what differences Corte Madera wanted, since you indicated in your report that they are the only city that did not to date agree to the uniform provisions. Just so we know I know they have they have a lot of commercial activity there. And I assume that has something to do with it, but just as a matter of information.
I think there were a couple differences. I don't have them off the top of my head, but the main difference is they are allowing bioplastics, and they will be enforcing their own ordinance. The county will not be enforcing that for them.
So does that mean that their entire hauling agreement has to be different if they can't utilize the same it's not landfill. I'm not quite sure what I call the compost.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, they will just have to make sure, or hopefully educate their businesses, that even though they're allowing bioplastics, those bioplastic materials should go in the landfill, in the trash, rather than the compost stream. Otherwise, their hauler will have to ensure that it doesn't contaminate WM Earth Care. And WM Earth Care will probably pull that compost out to really inspect it before it goes in.
So that doesn't nullify what the rest of the Marin jurisdictions are trying to do.
No.
Okay, thank you very much.
All right, thank you. Any other questions at this time? All right, we'll open it up for public comment. Is there anyone here who wishes to address this agenda item? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
We have Mr. Rothman.
All right, Mr. Rothman.
Yeah, thank you very much. First, I have a procedural question. The guest very nicely has stayed and she said, I'd be happy to answer questions. I have a question, but the previous guest also said I'd be happy to answer questions. And when I asked a question about why they weren't using the faster chargers, you didn't allow her to respond. You just moved on to the next agenda item. I hope that doesn't happen this time. Of course, I see the guest is still here. I'm thinking specifically about the situation at, say, Rustic Bakery, because, concrete things in our community. Rustic Bakery and the Woodlands Market. With respect to the Woodlands Market, they have a takeout counter where you could get salads and whatever, and you put them into little boxes, which seem to be cardboard boxes, but they're lined with plastic. Of course, when you put something moist in regular cardboard, it just goes right through. It's not feasible. So all of the plastic that the cardboard that I've seen for takeout foods, it does have a plastic liner. So I would appreciate you commenting on that. And also, if you would say whether what are called thermoform clamshells, which many takeout places use, whether they can still go on being used, and if they can't be used, then what are you urging those establishments to use? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. I will ask our guest to answer that, but first I want to finish any other public comment. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone else wishing to address this item?
I see none.
All right, I'll close the public comment and bring it back to answer the question that was put to you by Mr. Rothman, if you're able.
Sure, happy to answer that question. Rustic Bakery and Woodlands Market both have locations in some of the other jurisdictions that have already adopted the ordinance. And we have been working with, I know our technical assistance crew has reached out to Rustic. I'm not as sure about Woodlands, but they are receiving educational materials and offers of technical assistance. So we hope to help them with that transition to compliant materials. Regarding the plastic lined boxes, you are correct that if it looks shiny and it looks like plastic inside, it is not compostable. Tip for being at home is if you see something that looks like plastic, it's probably best to put it in the landfill. But then we are, providing information on alternatives, depending on what the material is. If it's something more liquidy and greasy, like a tikka masala or something, you could put it in an aluminum container, which can be rinsed and recycled. So there are alternatives to a plastic lined box, and we're trying to share that information through our technical assistance program. Regarding the thermoform clamshells, there are fiber-based alternatives that are exactly that clamshell shape. But they are made of fiber, don't have a lining, and they can be used for certain materials. I would encourage the council and the public, if you go to marincounty.foodware or marincounty.org/foodware, you can see that whole inventory of alternative compliant materials. It's very interesting to explore.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that response. Let me bring the issue back to council for any discussion and recommendation before us as consideration of approving the first reading and also authorizing the city manager to execute the memorandum of understanding that's attachment 1 to our materials.
Do you mind if I just ask staff a quick question?
Please.
So we have 3 businesses that will be affected by this ordinance, correct? And you said 2 are fully on board. The third, where does that stand? Meaning, are we imposing difficulties on them?
It's been a game of phone tag with the third business. So I'm just hoping to reach out to them.
Can you just remind me of the 3 businesses?
I'm sorry. So San Francisco Yacht Club, I spoke to. Rustic Bakery, I spoke to, and I've been playing phone tag with Ming's.
Okay.
Thank you. Any other questions or discussion items? Or are people willing to propose a motion? Getting dead silence here.
If there's no discussion, I'm happy to make a motion to approve the first reading of the ordinance and waive future readings of the ordinance in its entirety.
Thank you. Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. And then second, with respect to the authorizing the city manager to execute the MOU, do we need a motion on that? All right, I'll entertain a motion on that.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Seeing none, it passes unanimously. Thank you very much, and thank you again to our guest for the presentation.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to agenda item 6, other scheduled items, and 6A is discussion and possible action on the Park, Open Spaces and Lanes Committee's annual report. Do we have a report from staff or Ms. Watson? Here she is.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. We have with us Jenna Watson, Chair of the Parks, Open Space and Lanes Committee, here to present the committee's biannual report. This one is on progress that's been made on the priorities that of the committee in the last fiscal year.
Thank you. Hi, Jenna, please just come forward. Appreciate you being here.
I'm very happy that I'm able to be here in person as well. So thanks very much for having me, especially on a rainy night. So, all right. All right, so this is Parks, Open Spaces and Lanes Committee's second sort of mid-year report. You know, as you know, last year, 2022 was the first year of the new charter. And so in addition to having fewer meetings, we're now giving more reports to the council. I know that you're getting regular updates from staff and from Tony, but this is our chance to sort of, you know, tell you what's been accomplished and what we're hoping to accomplish for the rest of the year. And also let you know what our continued priorities are for this year. As you can see, the priorities haven't changed a whole lot. I did want to highlight a couple of things. Lane repairs, dead, dying trees, and general vegetation and tree management, scenic view obstructions, the impact of private projects on public lands, those all remain high priorities. The lanes initiative, which is, I'll say, the development of new lanes, has moved from high down to medium. Park Lane, as we've been sort of getting going with the planning on that project, is also medium. Centennial Park is also medium. We're continuing along slowly but surely on the improvements on Centennial Park. And Artist View has also moved down from high to medium. Ongoing repairs, improvements, et cetera, at Tom Price Park and the tennis courts. The playground, since our lovely renovation is now complete. Lagoon Road plantings and code enforcement are all low priorities for us. We wanted to keep them on our priorities list because while they are low priorities, they still are priorities. One thing I wanted to highlight is I have a mistake in my report, and I will be happy to amend my mistake. In item number 1, which is lane handrailing installation and repairs, I incorrectly omitted the rollover amount, which we still have in the lane repair budget from last year. It's going to be a rollover of $28,167. So rather than having a decrease in the budget, in the overall budgeted amount for lane repairs, there's actually an increase in the budgeted amount for lane repairs. So it's not cut from $30,000. It is actually an increase to $45,085. So my apologies. I wanted to highlight also the progress. This is the bottom of page 2 that we've made in lane repairs over the last year. The one that I find nearest to my heart is the serious repair of the Park Lane wooden steps. You may recall my showing of horrible pictures of the Park Lane steps last year. The steps have largely been, I won't say completely replaced, but they're magnificent when my dog and I walk up and down them now. In addition, we've been working with a number of homeowners to incorporate repairs to the stairs, whether it's railings or concrete work, when they've been doing their renovations to their house. I want to give a shout out to the owners of believe it's 270 Beach that's right next to Lower Woodwardia. If you haven't walked by, it's truly a magnificent sight to behold. You even have a nice sign and wooden, and pillars. It's great. And then work is also progressing on the replacement of the wooden railing at the bottom of Pagoda Lane. That work was funded in part by a grant from the Belvedere Community Foundation. So I want to thank our partners at the BCF as well. And then again, we have other lane repairs that are in progress. And then there's also some, and then also Upper Hawthorne Lane, the homeowners next to Upper Hawthorne Lane also repaired the lane that was next to their house. So I want to say thank you to them as well. While I'm on the mode of thank yous, I wanted to give a huge thank you to our staff with respect to vegetation, tree maintenance, and dead and dying tree mitigation. I got a note put in my mailbox this week to say thank you for the removal of the dead tree at number 13 Oak Avenue. So thank you to Tony for making that happen. Makes me look good as a neighbor. As everyone remembers, in addition to the rainy weather tonight, we had an amazingly wet winter and spring. This made the vegetation all over our city go absolutely insane. With all of that insanity comes a higher risk of fire fuel. Happily, the rainy weather and the fires, I'm going to knock on something, have not happened this year. But our city staff did a magnificent job of really trying to keep ahead of the vegetation and really trying to control it. In addition, there were a number of dead trees and dying trees, which were identified and removed by the city staff. I also know that the city staff enabled homeowners to remove dead and dying trees in a fairly expedited way, myself being one of them. And I also wanted to thank the city for enabling the cutting of red tape with respect to dead and dying trees. I also wanted to note that the 2023-2024 budget was increased in order to identify various ways in which we can be more vigilant in terms of fire protection and fire prevention, and that the city staff is seeking to hire an arborist to perform an assessment of trees on public land in general. As the chairperson of the Parks, Open Spaces, and Lanes Committee, I think that's a magnificent idea. All right. The next thing I wanted to highlight is scenic view obstructions. One of the things that makes our city so wonderful is our views. We have views from the city to the Golden Gate Bridge to Sausalito to Mount Tam to Lagoon, et cetera. And while we do have building codes that require that hedges fronting the road be maintained at 6 feet, I'm sure that all of you from walking around or driving around know that this is not always the case. Some of those hedges obviously don't block views, others do block views. I would like to say at this point that good hedges make good neighbors. And so I would like to encourage the council, since you've done such a great job of tree mitigation in other areas, to really think about view improvement this year. All right. I've touched on this a little bit already, but in terms of the effects of private projects on public lands, one of the things that the new charter in 2022 did was give our committee the ability to work with the Planning Commission and with the staff to have insight over renovation projects, building projects, et cetera, that either abut or otherwise affect public spaces. So I've been working with Sammy, who's on staff, in order to take a look at projects at the planning level that are mainly next to lanes or next to shorelines. And I think so far it's been a very good partnership. So I just wanted to say thank you, and I think it's working out very, very well. All right, on to larger projects and not quite the bread and butter. Park Lane, the stair rebuild and seating area. This is where there was also a small land swap with the homeowners, such that the city has been granted a triangle of land just above the wooden stairs on Park Lane. And over the past year, poor Tony has been working with CEQA and PG&E and as well as the homeowners to try to not only get the Park Lane steps repaired in the short term, but also really work on trying to put a bench right off of where the concrete stairs are and really create sort of a nice viewing platform. From there, you can see over this magnificent Monterey Pine, and you have this great view of Golden Gate Bridge. So over $38,000 of the funds that were allocated to the Park Lane stair replacement from last year's budget are rolling over to this one. So we are going to continue along. I know it seems like it's been somewhat slow going, but I promise you there has been progress. So we wanted to recommend keeping the Park Lane project in the 5-year plan. I think it will be a great asset to both Park Lane and to that side of the island where there's not that many benches. All right. The other larger project is Centennial Park. And one of actually our newest member of our committee has recently had a fun idea for an improvement in Centennial Park, which we will be discussing at our next meeting. So I'll give you a teaser, but no spoiler. And the main gist of the Centennial Park project is trying to replace the wooden stairs at the top, which are in a similar state to those that were at Park Lane before repair. And also really trying to create a reason for people to go to Centennial Park. Right now, it's kind of like a wide lane. We've been working on pruning the hedges and things of that nature, but it doesn't really have a park feel. It has sort of a sad pass-through feel. So that's also sort of a
yes.
Can we mute our Zoom participant?
Second, I
Thank
can't
you.
help.
Oh.
Sorry, that's someone from Zoom. Please proceed.
Sorry, I thought it was someone objecting to my, speaking about Centennial Park.
That'll come later, I'm sure.
Anyway, Centennial Park is a great space, and I feel like it's being underutilized. And so, in addition to replacing the wooden stairs at the top, which are somewhat past their prime, we're trying to think imaginatively, but not expensively, about ways to make Centennial Park a more welcoming space. All right. Artist View remains a priority. We're continuing to monitor the site for the control of vegetation, dead trees, Public Works. Part of the vegetation mitigation work that they've recently done is on the Artist View site. We're recommending just to continue to control vegetation. To this, right now, there's no budget for anything further. My Labrador likes scampering down it. That's about it. All right, and then the last item that I wanted to highlight was the tennis courts in Tom Price Park. Over the course of the past year, there have been a number of smaller improvements. And we're about to get a new water bottle filler, water fountain, and dog water fountain installed there, which I think will be great. It will replace a circa 1980 water fountain. that was there. We also have gotten some new benches on the tennis courts, and some new trees and bushes as well. So, and then last thing is I would like to give a round of applause to everyone who worked on the playground, the playgrounds. Come on, come on, come on. Because there's a fork in it, it's done, and we now have this magnificent playground, and we have our donor plaques, and we have a bench, and it is great. And every time I go past there and see the kids happily playing under their sun structures, I think it's just great. So anyway, I couldn't be more proud of our city with our new playground. So thank you. Now hit me.
Thank you, Jenna. That's a fabulous report, great written report, and a great summary for us here tonight. Thank you very much for that. Let me ask my colleagues if they have any questions. Councilmember Cooper, any questions? You don't have to.
I think it was a great report. I certainly appreciate everything Jenna's done. This is one of my committee assignments, so I always look forward to going to the meetings, and they're a lot of fun. And we have 2 new members there that we accepted in. So Nick and Charlie, and they're really enthusiastic, which is fun. Great to have them there because I'm sure they will move things forward. One of the questions I had is that when I saw the way you've restructured things from the high priority and the move things into medium and to low, it struck me that maybe almost creating an urgent list would be great. So the high priority there still seems to be an awful lot of them there, which you don't really know. Well, how do you rate the 6 or 7 high priorities?
Right.
And so, as you've mentioned several times, money is an issue. And so I was thinking that if you created even a higher level so that each year you're only looking at 2 or 3 projects, maybe only 1, depending on the size of it, and you don't get overwhelmed with trying to address lots of little things all the time. And then rather than say having $38,000 set aside for Park Lane, if you actually had an urgent lane that required the railing or stairs, since we need these for our evacuation and safety, I was thinking that maybe you take a lump sum rather than designate it out to a bunch of little projects once you've created the urgent list, and then the committee works with Tony sort of how to move forward on that. And anyway, so that's just a thought in reading this to make it maybe a little bit more effective for the money that is there.
Right.
And so then I was wondering, since this is a nice long list that goes on for several years, maybe what you're talking about with Charlie's idea of Centennial Park, I don't know what that is, but I remember there was a time when we used to go out and actually clean the lanes and sweep up leaves and, try to keep them in nice shape. So I didn't know if maybe moving away from being so project-based at this time for your committee, because you have this long list already, if you have thought about other directions for the committee to go in, going forward.
Okay, thanks. That's a lot. All right, so we included the chart at the beginning of the report this year to try to give sort of a snapshot of things. And the idea behind the status, which I guess didn't quite do what we wanted, was the idea of saying sort of needs attention on things that were ongoing in terms of, ongoing, mitigation efforts and ongoing repairs and things of that nature. But you are right. It's like getting pecked to death with 1,000 ducks. Our under number one of our high priority items, you know, in terms of lane repairs, we've got 1, 2, 3. We've got 5 in the, you know, in the high priority. In terms of prioritizing one lane over another, I think that really goes to, you know, what types of repairs need to be done and where that fits into other work that the staff and the city is doing. Because most of these are sort of, I talked with my hands, because most of these are smaller repairs. It's hard to get someone to go out with, you know, 3 bags of concrete to do, you know, little things. So we've been trying to bundle those together with other projects, and either Robert or Tony can probably speak to that. You know, because we meet four times a year. There's sort of a long list of like all of the little repairs that have been, you know, that have been done. But I agree. I mean, you know, we're on the water. Salt water is a terrible thing for wood and stone and, you know, metal, and it's a lot. But I would be happy to try to reorganize things in another way to sort of say, you know, these are the things that are really urgent, you know, and these are the things that are urgent. Sorry.
I don't want you to reorganize everything just for me. It was just
No, but
it's more
yeah.
of a comment on organization, I guess,
Right.
not what you have there.
Right. And that was kind of what we tried to do with the table, but I think we probably didn't go far enough. Sorry. And then with respect to sort of there is a general, I believe it's $20,000. Is that correct? In the general lane budget line item. So and I'll say not slated towards, you know, Park Lane or Centennial Lane, just sort of a general lane repair. Is that correct? Okay.
Yes, yeah, general lane repairs, yeah.
And that's really what's used to do the smaller, like, you know, missing railing here, crumbling concrete there.
Other questions for Jenna this time?
Yes, I have a few, but I thought maybe other people might cover a few of them, so I didn't. So I'll get started. Jenna, thank you so much for your hard work and for all of your committee and working with staff. It's a great report, and it's really helpful for us to have this information. My first question is, do we have a list giving the status of Anne Marie's tree list so that we know which trees have been addressed and which haven't?
Yes, somewhat. So Tony and I were going through it, sort of checking things off. And I'll be happy to say that the tree at 17 Oak Avenue that was on there is now down. But
so are the 4 that fell on our property?
yes.
I don't have an itemized list of it, no. But that is something that we have talked about, and one of the things is that I think it was in 2020 that list was made. So there's actually been quite a few changes. Quite a lot of those trees have come out. Some have fallen down, and then there are new trees that really should be added to the list. So yeah, it needs a kind of a revision, really, and that's something that we can certainly work on. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I think that would be helpful. We have had quite an eventful year this year, not just on Oak Avenue, but on the other sites mentioned in the report. But in addition to those mentioned, I think that the health of the trees in the public spaces and the effect that has on private property is something that's front of mind for many of our residents, and I get some questions about that. So part of what the committee is doing is looking at private actions that affect public land, but I think it's really important for us also on behalf of the whole community to look at what might be happening on public land that could adversely affect private land as well. So I think that would be a really good thing to put on the to-do list. I wanted to ask two things. One thing about Centennial Park, I think it's just great that you're giving that some attention. That land was donated to the city, and I think when the city accepts a generous donation of land, it's incumbent upon the city to keep it in good condition. So I think it's really great that you're looking at that. Do the renovations you're considering at all involve irrigating any part of that? I know at one time there had been some consideration of xeriscaping. I remember when James Campbell was involved, and I don't think that the committee decided that was the way to go. So what are your thoughts there? Because there's an expense involved in that.
Absolutely. I mean, there's no water source or power source other than from the neighboring homeowners. We've talked about ideas like rain barrels. We've talked about xeriscaping. It's an issue because, as we all know, nothing grows without water. And right now there's a lot of shade in Centennial Park. And so, while there's definitely plants that will grow in shade without water, they need water to be established first. The blackberries seem to be doing great, but
Poison oak. Okay, great. Well, we have a number, as you are well aware, we have a number of master gardeners in this community who are often willing to help, and so maybe they'll be able to help with that. I wanted to know, another council member mentioned about other actions. We just appointed a new member of the committee who was excited about a possibility of a community run. Is anything happening with that? And if you give quarterly reports, how will we be communicating that if and when it occurs?
So that would be Councilmember Harrington, the most athletic of all of the members of our committee by far. Even before being on our committee, he organized a lanes run. He realized that he did not include Corinthian Island lanes in his run, so he was thinking that's going to be a little bit longer this year. I'm not sure if his lanes run is really intended to be an official City of Belvedere sponsored event, or a bunch of really fit people running up and down stairs. But I will contact Charlie and let you know what the plans are so that you and Olaf can participate.
I think there was a lot of enthusiasm. The lanes are something that our residents really are proud of. They are amazingly well used, and something like a run just highlights to everybody, or even a walk or any part of that highlights to people who might not already be using them frequently, that it's a really wonderful, unique aspect of our community. Finally, I would like to talk about money and make sure that we are looking at all sources. I have talked to Public Works and about this. And so I have a short list of sources of funding in addition to our general fund, which we try to use as little as possible, of course, but sometimes do. But I want to make sure that we are seeking the grants, all grants available. And my short list includes Prop 68 funds. It's on page 73. of our budget. Also Measure A, and we get, that's about $85,000 a year, I think, with the 20% buy-in from the community, if I'm correct. Then we get Measure A funds. Then we have enjoyed the great generosity of Belvedere Community Fund, but I know many people involved in Belvedere Community would happily address additional requests, even if sometimes they're denied 1 year or deferred to another year. I know there's a lot of feeling in that wonderful group of our own residents that returning those donated and invested funds to the community is really one part of their mission. So we're deeply grateful to what they've done. And I encourage you to give them more good ideas. Not being afraid of rejection, let them do that if necessary, but at least make the ask. And finally, and this is important, I think, to Public Works as well, we think of funding sources, revenue sources for our lanes and open spaces as sort of within the rubric of recreation, but in fact, our lanes and our public spaces are a critical aspect of our evacuation plans and our public safety, as Councilmember Cooper mentioned. So I have mentioned this before, but I want to mention it to you as well, that we should be constantly looking at evolving state law with respect to funding for evacuation routes. And I'm not sure we have fully taken advantage of that. So just offering that suggestion. And I think some of that is recent legislation. And finally, the Oak Park Pocket Park deserves to find a place on your list at some point. Full disclosure, part of it is adjacent to our property. At one time in the distant past, we had watered it, and other community members had donated their time and resources to planting. I don't know if that's available anymore, but it is in disrepair, certainly in disrepair at this point, and should probably find its place on your list.
I will definitely add it to the list. I know that one of the neighbors at the corner of Bella Vista still does water, at least like the left-hand side of the Oak Pocket Park. I also wanted to add, in terms of funding sources, Zero Waste Marin. They provided the funding for the new composting trash cans that are going to be installed with the children's art on the side in Community Park. And they also provided the acquisition funds for our new bottle filler in Tom Price Park. The city is responsible for the cost of the installation of the new water fountain, but Zero Waste Marin did provide the funding for the acquisition of it.
Fantastic. And many thanks to Kathy Huber as well for
Yes.
her efforts in that regard.
Yes, absolutely. I think it'll be great. So thank you.
If I could chime in, Jenna, and this is something that's I think staff maybe should have caught earlier, and I'll add that you very graciously accepted responsibility for not including the rollover in your report from the previous year, which is something that I should be apologizing for, and staff will aim to pay closer attention to in future, so that we can allow you to paint a much hopefully rosier picture of the finances that is coming, through council for our parks and lanes. I wanted to mention, just because this also could be in the report and would provide, again, a better picture. The TAM Measure A funding is currently being used for lane design and engineering, lane maintenance and minor repairs, and the San Rafael DG pathway restoration, which is a project that we're going to be doing hopefully before the winter this year. And then also the Measure A grant has been, that's what's being used for the vegetation management work on West Shore. That was a grant of, $50,000 that's being used for that. So, I think my note is to make sure that that's included in the report in future.
Thank you very much. While we're on that, page 73 of our budget for this year reports Prop 68, the Prop 68 money, and it quite rightly indicates that it's 85,000 for prior years, but the budget column 23-24 is empty. So I was just wondering if we had an explanation for that. And I think it's important to be doing this with Jenna because this is kind of how it all fits together, and would be helpful to know what the plan is there.
Good evening, Mayor Lynch and Council. Helga Cotter, Administrative Services Director, and I can answer that. That 85,000 is going to be part of the rollover from 22-23 into this fiscal year.
But isn't that a use it or lose it funding source? And do we not get 85,000 each year?
We don't get 85,000 each year, and it is part of a grant with the state. And I think, Robert, if you want to speak to the project.
Yeah, you're right. It's a one-time grant. That was my understanding. 85,000. We originally had a couple of projects earmarked for those grant funds. I think one of them in the early stages was the electric vehicle charging station that was over at the City Hall. There's pretty strict criteria on what we can use the money for. Number one, it has to be a community use. That's obvious. A lot of things are. However, the other one is that it has to specifically be for something that's park related and also is fully accessible to the public. So lanes, for example, we'd love to be able to spend that money on a lane, but again, the fully accessible component is really challenging for us. Tony and I are actually working with that grant provider to identify a new source or a new project that is able to meet that criteria.
Would the Park Lane project qualify?
I don't think so. We flowed that one past them, and again, it's that accessibility component is the one that's difficult. Centennial Park is technically a park, so we're trying to work out potentially some kind of a workaround with that one.
Okay, thank you very much. I really appreciate sometimes applying for and obtaining, locating, understanding, applying for and following through on the grant process is really time consuming and onerous. And I want to thank you all for working together to achieve those funds.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jenna, for the report. I enjoyed reading it. I'll be brief. Just a quick question. I'm following up something that Jane brought up, and it's the process by which these projects, repairs and maintenance, as well as enforcements, are elevated, and how that actually gets from investigations through completion. We found we're always battling for staff time. That's one of our major constraints here in the city. Can you describe the process that a project from a priority list to completion goes through? Is there a advocate in your committee, or do you sort of battle for Tony's time as he's able to give it?
So it's fairly ad hoc. I'll just be very, very frank. I'll give you the example of the water bottle filler, just because I think that's sort of a good one. We had gotten a number of complaints, quite frankly, about the lack of adequate water at the tennis courts and at Tom Price Park. We spoke with Jessica Hotchkiss over at the ranch. Tony contacted Zero Waste Marin, discovered that the water bottle filler did indeed fit within their parameters. We then worked with staff to try to make sure that we had ADA compliance. We also had the dog bowl filler, very important for Tom Price Park. We spoke to Jessica about the need for having 2 different water fountains, one of a child height and wheelchair height, and one at adult height, as well as a water bottle filler. We then went to the process of making sure that the model that we were going to order then really did fit within the Zero Waste Marin parameters to have them pay for it. Tony contacted Zero Waste Marin, got the allocation of funds from them. We ordered the water bottle filler, and now a couple of months later, it's been delivered, and it will be installed. So it's, yes, it is a lot of staff time.
Yeah, I guess my follow-up comment would be based on Councilmember Cooper's comment about, how you prioritize, and Councilmember Kiminster's comment about the funding sources, whether it's sprinkled throughout our line items or a sought-after fund or sought-after funding, is, I imagine if you could isolate or identify, the specific projects for that given year and get them into as close to shovel-ready project as possible, tied up in a bow, whether it's through your committee or with input from Tony and their valuable time, so that you can say, here's what we're going to spend our money on, these 2 projects, so you can lop them off, as opposed to carrying the projects over year by year to year, which seems to be sort of the history. Just that comment.
Thank you.
But congratulations. Thank you.
I agree that the process should be more efficient. So.
Any other questions from my colleagues? Jen, I just have a couple of quick questions or comments. First of all, thank you again for this excellent report. It really is very, very helpful and very comprehensive. Congratulations on the itemized list of accomplishments in the last year. Seriously, it's really terrific. And particularly the ones that had safety implications, like the stairs at the bottom of Park Lane and so forth. Really wonderful to see that being addressed. I also had a question for you about the comment about hedges. This is bottom of page 5. And in the 3rd paragraph in that section, you say that on Belvedere Island, the building code requires a maximum of 6-foot hedges.
It's different down on the lagoon.
I should know this from having been on planning, but what is it on the lagoon? Is it?
It's up to
20.
It's up to with approval by neighbor or consideration, something like that.
I apologize. I was speaking with Andrew there for a second about a possible vote. So I missed the question.
It's not important. I can look it up, but I wanted to just that copy because I wasn't aware of the distinction, so that's helpful. What has been the reaction among your committee and with staff to the prospect of enforcing that 6-foot hedge limit? Because it is observed in the breach, as you know, as well as anyone, but it's really it's a little bit jarring when you walk around.
Yes.
So what's the appetite that you've got to enforcement?
So certain of our committee members would really love to have some sort of code enforcement, with fines and neighbor shaming, et cetera. Where I see it come into play is where the views of neighbors are basically impeded by the growth of hedges, by usually they're I'll say in front neighbor, and so it leads to neighbor conflict, which then sort of bubbles up to us getting an email or a note in the mailbox or something something of that nature. It's a sticky one because, as I said, there are certain hedges that are on, I'll say the upslope, that are 20 feet high and don't don't block anybody's view. Don't block a view from a roadway, don't block a neighbor's view. And so it would be a selective enforcement if we were going to go about it for views. The easy ones are where there's actually view easements. There's a couple of places on West Shore. But by and large, it's like any other kind of enforcement. There has to be an actual harm before, I don't know, you know what I'm saying?
Okay, well, thank you for that. Last, I wanted to just follow up on this coordination between your committee and the planning department about projects that affect public lands. I think that's genius. Sounds like you think it's going well. I'm delighted to hear it. I know it's a lot of work though. Do you feel, are you able to spread that around at all? Do you have the capacity on your committee to turn that around within 2 weeks?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And it's largely things of the nature of a homeowner wants to build a new fence that abuts a lane. And, our purview is we want to make the enjoyment of the people walking up and down the lane not feel like they're in a subway tunnel, and to make sure that there's still green around it. Mostly these are things that the homeowner would want to do anyway. They don't want to have like sort of a bare wooden fence that they look at either. And so it's been going very, very, very smoothly, and generally our turnaround is a couple of days.
Terrific. Thank you. That's all I had. Thank you again for the report.
Okay, of course.
And we will open up public comment on this item. Is there anyone here who wishes to address this agenda item? Not seeing any. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
I see none.
All righty, we'll close the public comment and just bring it back to council. The recommendation from staff is that we receive the report. Do we need a vote on that? Andrew?
I've been informed we do not need a vote.
Very well. Then, barring any objection, the report is received. And thank you again, Jenna. That brings us to item 6C, which we're taking before 6B, regarding discussion of possible action on traffic safety improvement on San Rafael in front of City Hall. And we have a recusal, I believe. Councilmember Kemnitzer.
Mayor Lynch, I would like to recuse myself voluntarily from item 6C on tonight's agenda pertaining to the intersection at Laurel, Acacia, and San Rafael Avenues. Although the city has been working on improvements to this intersection for years, myself included, my daughter and her family have purchased a home on Acacia now, and now live on that street within the immediate vicinity of this intersection. And thus the final options with respect to the final design choice, which is before the council tonight, could be, I think, perceived to have a disproportionate benefit to my family. And so I would voluntarily recuse myself at this time.
Thank you. While we're waiting for Councilmember Kemnitzer to exit the chambers, I assume we have a staff report from Mr. Boyd.
Thank you, Mayor. Yes, we do have a staff report. And I'm sure everybody is becoming quite familiar with the design. At our last meeting, City Council directed staff to make changes to the possible implementation of the project and to break it into a phased approach. And so we've worked with the traffic engineers to do this. We have a pre-phase installation of a stop bar and stop sign, followed by phase 1, which is work directly in front of City Hall, and phase 2, which is crosswalks across San Rafael and Laurel. And I'll run through each of these incremental approaches to the work just briefly. So the pre-phase one, as I said, is the introduction of a stop sign in the westbound lane of San Rafael Avenue. This creates a four-way stop at that intersection, which is probably the biggest change that vehicle users would notice in this project. That can be done fairly quickly and easily, possibly by our own staff. Phase one would follow that, and that's work in front of City Hall, mostly sidewalk improvements and changes to the layout of the parking in front of City Hall. So rearranging parking stalls from 3 diagonal stalls, including a non-compliant ADA stall, to 2 parallel stalls, 24 feet in length. One of those would be a short-term parking stall, 24 minutes. The existing ADA stall would be moved to the rear of the building, and a new path of travel is available there to be upgraded. Other small details, such as moving the flagpole and fire hydrant to ensure the compliant path of travel. In this phase, there are no delineated crosswalks. And the reason for that is that once you've painted a crosswalk on the road, it triggers requirements for path of travel, and curb ramps being the main one of those, because they need to be very carefully graded in concrete. And path of travel, so there'd be an onwards path of travel from an existing crosswalk that needs to be contemplated and then implemented. The bus stop is shown within this intersection. This is where it currently stops. We've been informed by our traffic engineer that it could be moved to the stop, to the proposed stop sign, or stay where it is. There's not enough traffic in this intersection for it to make that much of a difference. There are 2 school bus routes that stop here, Del Mar and Bel Air, and they're both on the afternoon drop-off at either 2 or 3 or 4. One thing to note is that visibility at this intersection from Acacia, the existing stop line shown in the design is actually the existing stop bar is actually much closer to the road than shown in the design, and visibility is much clearer when you're out there than it appears. Phase 2 would introduce delineated crosswalks across San Rafael and Laurel Avenue and related safety and ADA compliance elements. And then the connection of a sidewalk on Laurel to provide a path of travel from Laurel Avenue to City Hall over the crosswalks. A bulb out would be needed to accommodate the pedestrian ramp across San Rafael Avenue. And then it would also be used for the crosswalk for Laurel. Drainage would be installed. There's a small item on there, and this would have to be sized for purpose. There is a drain line that runs underneath Laurel, so it would be quite easy to connect to that, and it would be quite an improvement. Right now, the water washes down Laurel Avenue and into San Rafael Avenue, where it then flows down San Rafael Avenue. Yeah, an improvement would be a drain that connects it and removes it from the street. The costs for each of these phases has been estimated by both parametrics, traffic engineers, and for the ADA component, the city engineer, John Moe. And to summarize, in pre-phase, the pre-phase stop sign, the cost would be estimated to be approximately $1,555. For phase 1, it would be $266,000. Phase 2, $132,000. The total for all of those would be $400,633. If the project was done in one single project, the total would be $347,666. The current funding available comes to $358,000. That is rollover from previous years' allocations in the CIP budget and this year's allocation of $120,000, as well as funds from a City Hall ADA improvement capital fund of $27,000. And so following the council direction to move to a phased approach, the recommended action from staff is to approve phase 1 of the project and go from there. I don't have anything more, so if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them.
Thank you. Questions for Tony?
Yes.
I have a quick question. I'm sorry, I wasn't at the council meeting when you discussed this last time, so I apologize if this was answered before. How much of this project is required for us to be ADA compliant, and what is the timeline to be ADA compliant? And this is just in relation to the parking space, or where exactly does that fit into this?
That's a big question. So the ADA compliance, it has different levels depending on what work is done. There is an existing ADA path of travel from the sidewalk that runs down San Rafael Avenue into the entrance of City Hall. And that's what the curb ramp is. I don't know if you can see my cursor on the screen, but over here. This curb ramp that is currently out front of City Hall, in front of the steps from the patio onto the sidewalk, appears to just go straight out into the street, which it does. But the reason for that is that is an ADA curb ramp, and the path of travel from there is, I don't know if, it's not a very good cursor, but you'll see at the ADA parking stall, there is another curb ramp that goes onto the patio. So the existing path of travel goes from the sidewalk into the street, through the parking lot, and then onto the patio. If that path of travel is preserved, there are actually no ADA improvements required. So if nothing else is done, that can continue to be the ADA path of travel. If the curb or parking is altered, then a new ADA compliant path of travel needs to be provided that addresses the same need that path of travel did. So from that sidewalk to City Hall. And so that's why there's a very big sidewalk with the rearrangement of parking in phase 1. That's for that path of travel.
So we're creating an ADA compliance issue where there isn't one currently.
That is not an ADA compliant path of travel right now. It is the only ADA path of travel, but it's not a compliant path of travel. So once we touch it, we need to improve it and bring it up to ADA standards.
But if you don't touch it, there isn't a requirement under ADA regulations to upgrade if you're not touching something.
I believe that it's only when that path of travel is modified or altered that we would need to, yes. So there's no requirement right now, no.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I think it's existing non-conforming.
Right, yes.
Categorization. A couple of quick questions. Thank you, Tony, for this. Looks like between P2, I understand, is the pre-phase stop sign and the stop markings, yes. Then in subsequent P3 and P4, it moves forward. Why would we do that?
Yes, so the reason for that, and I will use the arrow keys on here. So this is the P2 that you were referring to. This is the addition of a stop bar. That is behind the existing curb ramp on the street. And so that stop bar being behind the curb ramp is the safest. It actually enhances the safety of a person who would be using that curb ramp. When the curb is altered, as it is in this design, that stop bar is moved forward. Reason for that is to bring all the stop signs in the intersection closer together to enhance visibility.
Okay, I understand. And so you wouldn't necessarily need that curb ramp there any longer because that's no longer the path of travel.
Correct,
Yeah,
yes.
I understand. I do think, which came up in the last meeting, that the closer you bring that stop sign and that stop bar to the parking spaces, the more congested it becomes, the more difficult it becomes to get in and out of those parking spaces. So if it works farther back, you may want to consider keeping it there, just because it makes that parallel parking that much more complicated.
Thank you. Yeah, and I can add that it was actually a little closer to the parking spaces, and the traffic engineers moved it back 4 feet. So they said it was now 8 feet back from the rear of the parking stall. But I can absolutely see your point that pulling it back would give a little bit more breathing room.
If we do consider phase 1 of this, I would really have them double check, the utility of moving it forward, versus the parking constraints it creates. Tony, you and I also spoke about the ADA upgrades in the lower parking lot, and there may be a alternative to that $50,000, because part of our acceptance, or part of our reluctant acceptance for the parallel parking spaces, was the ADA spot that would be relatively easily adopted down below. But that no longer seems to be the case. And you had mentioned that there might have been there might be an alternative to the $50,000 improvements for that ADA spot used somewhere else. Is that still the case, or was that eliminated?
Yes. So the assumed ADA parking space below was one that apparently used to be an ADA, or the ADA parking space, which was right next to the police station entrance to the building. And that's now a loading zone. That parking stall would need to be regraded, and a path of travel from there to the building would need to be installed. So that actually ended up being a surprising amount of work. Once at the entrance to the building, the path of travel is ADA compliant, elevator and the route through the offices. What City Engineer John Moe realized was that there is another ADA parking stall down there next to the electric vehicle chargers. And so if this ADA parking space was put next to that one, and a path of travel was made from there, the grade of the slope of the parking over there is much less. So there'd be much less work required for a compliant path of travel and for the parking stall. And it would also improve the ADA access from that existing parking space. So it would improve the overall ADA compliance and accessibility of the building, and possibly at less of a cost than our first look.
How about, that's not in here because you haven't investigated thoroughly, or?
It's not in here because it was only last week that when we're down there looking at it, that we sort of realized that this might be an alternative option.
I understand. Thank you. Those are my questions.
Yeah.
Any questions? Councilman Cooper? No? Just briefly for my information, Tony, you said we presently have $358,000 set aside for this. And then did that include or not include some segment of money that was for ADA improvements to city halls?
That does include there is a rollover of, I believe, about $27,000 for City Hall ADA improvements.
And is that grant money, or is it Belvedere funded?
That's a good question. I might let Helga chime in here on that.
Good evening, Mayor. That money would be part of a transfer from the general fund. It is not grant funds.
Okay, so to put it differently, could all of this 358 grand be repurposed to other city needs?
Yes, it could. The 36,000 that's been allocated to this San Rafael Laurel Avenue, that is Measure B allocation from the Transportation Authority of Marin, and that would have to go to another bike ped project. So,
Okay, so we could use it, but it would be restricted in how we could use it if we didn't use it out here.
exactly.
All right.
Helga, sorry, another what project? You said it can be
A
repurposed?
bike pedestrian project.
Excellent. Any other questions at this time? All right. Thank you. Why don't we open this up for public comment? Is there anyone here who wishes to address this agenda item? Yes, can you come forward, please, and tell us your name and address? I do. For the benefit of everyone.
Okay, is this what I, yeah. I'm Patricia Kudo. I live across the street at 1 Laurel Avenue. I've been here lots over this. You have the 3 phases, Tony. Is it possible to skip the parking phase and just go to the crosswalk phase, or they have to be done in that order? Is there, not that I want to do that, but I just, want to keep aware of the order of things. Does the parking have to be done before the crosswalks?
That's a good question. I believe that the parking would need to be done because the sidewalk, it involves the sidewalk in front of City Hall. So the path of travel from the crosswalk towards City Hall would need to be compliant with the introduction of a new crosswalk. So from the crosswalk to City Hall would need to be changed. And that's what that parking arrangement would be part of.
And then if you do go through this, it's another 3 phases. My questions revolve around the bulb out, and if it's only going to our house, it might not need to be as big as if it goes across the street. Will there be another chance to discuss that bulb out before the 3rd phase, or this is the only time to talk about it?
If council were to approve phase 1 as a project, we would have to return to council for phase 2, which and that's what the bulb out is part of. So that would be discussed again with council.
Okay, so I don't need to talk about that now. I'll save that for later.
I mean, unless council wanted to, for example, improve the entire project at once. But
Okay, well, just quickly then, I study the bulb out more closely, living on the corner and walking around the corner. And if the crosswalk just goes to our house, I see people walking down Laurel Avenue and going around the bulb out, and people coming Santa Fe Avenue and going around the bulb out. They're not going to step over the curb or go around it to go to the waiting space for a car to go by. So it feels to me like and I do agree with ADA compliant issues, but in this situation, if you're putting curbs in a bulb out and people are coming down or across, they're not going to step into that waiting area to step back out again to cross the street. And are you putting people more into traffic than you are, making it safer from traffic? Now, if it goes from our house over to Acacia, then you have, I assume, 2 openings for people to get through. But so that's my concern, because I've looked at different crosswalk situations since I've been in this, and I don't see anybody in a wheelchair going around the bulb out to come and wait for traffic to come back out again. Everybody's got to kind of wait on the outside of the bulb out. So if there's a simpler way to make a waiting space at the corner of Laurel Avenue without the curbs, I think the curbs are going to impede people's progress as opposed to make it safer. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom who wishes to address this item?
We do. We have Emily Levine.
All right, thank you.
Emily, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Sorry, that was erased by accident. I don't have any comment. Sorry about that.
Oh.
Thank you.
We have no other hands raised.
All righty, thank you. Well, we'll close the public comment and bring it back to council for discussion. Councilmember Wilkinson, can I begin with you?
Sure. So in general, I am all in favor of, capital improvements projects where they feel useful and warranted. And I appreciate a lot of time has been taken to explore the merits of this project. But Tony sort of said it when he was discussing earlier where the bus would park, that there's not enough traffic to warrant concern. And I don't believe there's ever been any incidents or accidents in this location. Is that correct?
I believe there've been no injury accidents. There have been some accidents, but no injury accidents that I'm aware of.
Okay. I mean, to me, to me, it's a no-brainer that the additional stop sign there makes a lot of sense, because I do feel, particularly for people who aren't from Belvedere, it's a weird place to not have a stop sign, and they don't anticipate people turning. So I think that's really a vital improvement. But honestly, the rest of it, when you're giving a price tag of nearly $400,000, it feels like it creates as many problems as it solves. And I don't, with all of the fiscal constraints that the city currently have, believe this is necessarily a good use of public money.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper.
Mayor Lynch, just
Oh.
real quick, as we were taking public comment, the hand went up right at the last second, right before we closed it. I believe Ken Johnson is on the line if you want to address his public comment.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Let's reopen public comment. Hello, Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Johnson, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to chime in on the financial aspects of this. I really do think that stop sign should be put in. It's an inexpensive way to add safety to the intersection, and we can then see what happens. As has been stated, we've had no injury accidents at that intersection. I think some of the major issues that were raised at the last council meeting, it's been tweeted, but really haven't been addressed. And I think we add to that this excellent report we just heard from Jana Watson on safety issues regarding the lanes, not just beautification. In my mind, take a priority in this situation. So I'd like to chime in with, I read Linda Bine's written statement to the city. I don't have anything to add to that. I'm supportive of it. But I did have another last comment. The question, maybe I heard wrong, but I heard the numbers 347 to 460,000. Did I misunderstand that?
I think the numbers that were given, it was, if everything was done all at once, it would be 347. If phase one was done, it would be 266. But the total number, if the projects were done in phases that's in the report, is 400 grand.
Okay.
Not 460.
Thank you.
Is that it, Ken?
Yes. Thank you.
Alrighty, thanks for calling in. Do we have anyone else on Zoom?
I see none.
Alrighty, we'll close the public comment again and bring it back to council. Councilmember Cooper.
I think I've sort of said what I believe the last couple of times we've discussed this, and I would absolutely support the new stop sign. I think that's crucial and will hopefully save us through the future so that we don't have any even thought of any accidents. I think for me, the funding, I could see it being used more efficiently for our police department needs, to focus on city infrastructure needs, addressing repairs as was mentioned for our emergency preparedness on the lanes, and also to continue addressing the issue of dead trees on city property. And so for that reason, I can only support the new stop sign.
Thank you. Vice Mayor Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I don't have too much to add. I'll agree with both council members who have spoken tonight. The first stop sign is certainly a no-brainer. I would agree with that. I wouldn't characterize, having driven here and spoke to Tony about this a little bit, there may not be any injury accidents, but there's a lot of near misses. And I do think that this stop sign would prevent a significant majority of them. So that's certainly essential and crucial. I do take strongly your point about if we touch it, we have to fix it. So with the overall perspective of what we have to look at from a financial perspective, this doesn't seem to rise to a priority level that we would choose to spend this amount of money at this time, given the priorities and the projects, even that we've heard tonight and that Jane just mentioned. So I would suggest the pre-phase project and, pack these up and hold on to them nicely for a time to look at. Maybe if there's any work to do, really try to investigate that ADA compliant spot down below, because that seems to be a killer to this project alone. That amount of money, roughly, 10 to 15% of the project to relocate that spot. That was anticipated to be a bonus, and that's not happening. Thank you.
What do you, oh, sorry, just back on what Peter was saying. Since we have that grant money, if you find out that doing the ADA space down below is less, maybe you would want to consider that if it fits into that grant money, and then it would be already and useful for people if it was brought up.
Yeah, possibly. I think the grant money is for bikes and pedestrian.
Oh, okay, not
yeah,
ADA. Okay.
But we can definitely look into it. Yep.
I just want to echo the comments of all my colleagues and Ken Johnson, who called in public comment. And I also want to thank Tony, you and your team, for putting together this report. We've talked about this many times. We've asked you to go back to the drawing board many times. I know it's been a ton of work. You can see why we kept asking, because we're really struggling with it. These are important issues and the numbers are big. And last time we asked you if you could break it out like this so we could see what the menu items look like, a la carte or all together. And very, very helpful, very enlightening. And it really sort of puts a fine point on, what it takes to do these kinds of projects. And we're then left with debating what is the bang for the buck, invested in either one of these two phases or invested elsewhere in the community. And so I agree entirely with my colleagues, but I do want to thank our Public Works team for all the hard work. And this work is not lost and forever gone. There may be a time when the city's better positioned to be able to fund some or all of these aspects of it. So, but again, thanks very much for the efforts. And
you're welcome.
I will entertain a motion directing or approving the installation of the new stop sign.
Can make a motion to direct staff to proceed with the installation of the stop sign and related road markings, and to not proceed with the next phase of the project.
I'll second that.
All right, all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed? It passes unanimously. Thank you. Brings us to our last agendized item, which is listed as 6B. This concerns a discussion and possible action. All right, the record will show that Councilmember Kemser has re-entered chambers. Discussion and possible action about approving the hiring of an additional sworn police officer. And do we have a staff report?
I do. Thank you, Mayor Lynch. This last item before us tonight is a request to approve a budget amendment to hire additional police staffing. Given the small size of our police department, we are susceptible to minor changes to personnel. Even the loss of a single officer means others have to work overtime to cover those duty shifts. Recently, we lost one officer to the city of Novato, and they're down another officer due to a long-term illness. This means we are reduced from our staffing from 5 to currently 3 full-time officers in the police. Tiburon PD has kindly stepped in to help us fulfill our weekly schedules, and our own remaining officers have done an incredible job coming together to maintain a 24/7 police coverage. Fortunately, Chief Wu has been successful in backfilling one of those officers' positions. His new hire will begin work next Monday. Still, it would be several months before this individual will be trained and fully independent. Effectively, we'll still be operating with 3 officers until February of next year. So in light of these issues, staff's recommendation is to approve a budget amendment authorizing the hiring of an additional duty officer at the cost of approximately $136,000 for what's remaining of the current fiscal year. The total ongoing annual expense will be about $202,000, which represents the employee's fully loaded salary and benefits. So to accomplish this, staff is recommending that 3 projects from the capital budget be deferred. Those are included in the staff report and resolution. The largest of those projects is for the installation of the solar and EV charging stations at the courtyard. I'll point out that even though we would officially have 7 police staff on the books, that hiring this officer is not necessarily a commitment to waive the 7th officer deferral. As we begin the budgeting planning process for next year, we would work with the Finance Committee to explore long-term funding for the police, whether that would be through scaled back capital projects, reduced city services, or consolidation discussions with the town of Tiburon for a consolidated police department. So with that, that concludes my report, and I'm happy to take questions.
Thank you. Do you have questions for Mr. Zadnik?
Robert, I just have a quick question. How often right now are shifts going uncovered because either our police or Tiburon can't cover those shifts?
Well, like I said, the police department has done an incredible job working overtime and modifying their existing schedule to minimize, if not prevent any shifts from going uncovered. My understanding is that it's been very few, if any.
Okay, thank you.
Can I, Robert, you mentioned that there's 2 officers no longer working, one who has been hired by a neighboring Marin jurisdiction and the second through long-term illness. So this position would be to replace the one that moved to Nevada.
No, I should clarify that. Currently, the officer that is coming on to duty next Monday is replacing that officer, Novotny, who moved on to Nevada. The recommendation before us tonight is actually to hire an additional officer on top of that. And I think our goal in doing this, again, we're dealing with the issue of, there's a time period for a new hire before they're able to be on the streets independently. So our goal, which I think is included in the staff report, is to try and find somebody that can lateral over. That'd be a police officer that has experience but wants to come to Belvedere. That person would be able to start right away, or more or less right away, as soon as we hire them.
So this is basically to replace, because it's additional monies, the officer that's on sick leave.
Correct.
Sick leave, and you're looking at the incremental cost of this officer and or potential cost with Tiburon's coverage.
Correct.
Got it. I understand. Thank you.
Other questions?
So if the officer who's on sick leave were to come back to work, we then have 7 officers. We then have 6 officers plus a chief.
Correct.
And no budget to pay for that beyond this year.
Correct. We'd have to find other cost savings. So in my report, I mentioned that we work with the Finance Committee to try and find cost savings from either reduced capital projects or other, unfortunately cuts of city services to make that happen, if it's the intent that we continue at the same level of police staffing that we currently have.
Right, but to be clear, you're not asking us to approve a 6th on-duty officer plus the chief on an ongoing basis. This is, for now, this is a stopgap until we can assess.
That's correct. And, at this time, we're not certain if that particular officer will be coming back. I will say that they are close to retirement, so that is a real possibility. Okay. We would be back to 6 officers essentially at that time if they were to retire. And we would again have to have a discussion of whether or not to bring on a 7th officer.
We've been deferring now for 2 years?
Since
3
2020,
years?
I believe.
3 years, yeah.
This is the 3rd year.
Okay, thank you.
And Rob, I don't know if you're able to answer this, but the officer that's on long-term illness, what are the conditions or what are the factors that would remove that officer from our active payments, whether it's whether it's retirement or benefits taken over? What are there conditions that would happen?
So if to speed along the process, I would say, is that what you're asking?
Well, I'm certainly this officer has the benefit of his long-term healthcare benefits and retirement and everything else that he or she would have the opportunity to utilize. At what point does in a sense he come off our books, if ever? I mean, for that matter. Forgive my ignorance, but I'm trying to understand that.
Yeah, well, I would say our understanding has been that this particular officer is intended to retire soon, within the next couple of years, but certainly there's no obligation for them to do that. And if they were able to recover quickly, they would be back on the books. I don't know how likely that is, and I probably can't comment at this time. There's certainly workman's comp issues that we'd be dealing with in the interim. And potential discussions that we would have with this person about retiring, whether or not that's beneficial to us or the city, that would certainly be a discussion.
But this can't be a sort of non-resolvable circumstance, right? I mean, if someone's on disability or long-term illness, at some point, insurance takes over, benefits take over, and it's not necessarily on the company's dime in a sense. No disrespect to the individual. I'm just trying to.
Right.
It's
unlikely it would be something that would continue for another decade or 2 decades, something along those lines. It would be most likely resolved in the next few years, probably at the longest.
Thank you.
I want to go back to my question. So even the circumstance, the police officer who's on sick leave right now comes back to work and we're then at 6 officers plus a chief. How easy is it to let a police officer go if we do not have the budget to pay for that many police officers?
That's a good question. I think, certainly if it's budget related and not performance related, if this person would be, on some kind of a probationary status, then I'd say it'd be easier than if they're a long-term employee. I can let Jason comment to that. I think there'd probably be, perhaps some BPOA, union more or less guidelines that they would consider whether or not the officer has seniority, which one does, and how that would work.
Yes, in those circumstances, I think what we can invoke is the 18-month probation, in which we are, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we can't dismiss an individual without cause, just based on 18-month probationary period.
But what happens if you just don't have the budget to pay for them?
That would be a discussion I think we would have with our HR consultant that we contract with the city to give us some guidance in that area. If there isn't budget for something, then yeah, there's certainly ways that the public sector and the private sector let employees go. And again, getting back to my point, I think it's based on level of seniority. If the new officer is the person that's kind of lowest on the totem pole, so to speak, they would be the first cut.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Kensler.
Yes, could you discuss additional costs to the city that would be incurred in addition to salary? Equipment, space, car, all of the costs that would flow from our decision tonight.
Can you take that? Okay, thank you very much for the question. In terms of space, there will be an additional cost because we already have a unisex locker room. Sorry, beg your pardon. It's unisex bath locker room, and we have sufficient number of vehicles. So the other stuff will be the equipments that we normally would furnish a new officer anyway. But what we did, we tried to minimize it, and this new officer does have some equipment from the previous position that will be bringing forth to help us minimize some of these costs.
I think other than that, though, we're not talking about new vehicles, patrol vehicles, or other large ticket, large purchase items that we would have to budget for. It's
That is
really
correct.
just salary and benefits.
That's correct.
Any other questions?
given our conversation before about the crosswalk, was any of that money pulled out already, or was all that money just sort of line item that it could be there? That was anything reserved? Like, can we use the freed up money that we just to help cover this?
Yes. So I believe it was 358,000 less the 36,000 that was the Measure B money.
So a little over 300.
A little over
yeah.
300,000 could be freed up to help cover this police officer position.
Thank you.
But the proposal here, Mr. Zadnik, the resolution is deferring the itemized capital projects, which would free up enough cash to cover for the remainder of the fiscal year. And then we would find some new way to pay for this officer in the next budget cycle, the 202 fully loaded number.
Yes, that's correct. Again, it's the council's discretion. These are recommendations from the staff after reviewing the budget. I think the assumption going into this was that we'd be potentially continuing with a sidewalk and pedestrian improvement project in front of City Hall. This is new information. Now that we're delaying that project or potentially deferring it indefinitely, those funds will be available. Like I said, it's the discretion of the city council, whether they use the recommendations from staff that are in the report or consider funds from another source.
Are any of these particular projects achievable or essential for 2023-24?
So I think the largest project, which is solar and EV charging at the courtyard, we identified that one because it was likely that it wasn't going to be achievable in this current fiscal year budget. It's a complicated project, which I know Councilmember Wilkinson is well aware. The last directive that we had from council was to consider battery backup systems in addition to solar, which our initial research showed was cost prohibitive. There may be grants available where they weren't 6 months ago when we were discussing this issue. But the other remaining two items, the painting of the courtyard and the city hall renovations, those are relatively easy projects that we could complete in this fiscal year.
Okay.
But also items that we felt that we could defer if needed.
Thank you.
Any other questions for staff at this time?
Yes, I think you might check with David Chan at TAM regarding that EV charging station, since it's on the city property, and discuss with him the general benefits and whether it might qualify for their grant program.
Thank you. Let's open this up for public comment. Is there anyone here wishing to address this agenda item? Not seeing anyone. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
Mr. Rothman?
All right, very well.
Thank you very much. When I read this on the agenda item, I contacted Chief Wu to try to gain a fuller understanding. And what I gathered was that we now have 3 patrol officers. And that we are now with the new person who's coming on, needs some training, but will be all set by February. We then will be up to 4 patrol officers. We are approved for 6, but one of them is not funded. So there really are 5 with the new one, except that one of the 5 is not available because they're sick, but they're being paid, but they're sick. And so we have an officer, but we don't have a patrol officer. We don't have a working officer. And I said, well, how long will the pay go on? I'm sorry, the person is sick, but for how long will that go on? Because so long as it goes on, we're not going to have more than 4 patrol officers. So Chief Wu didn't know, and he referred me to Helga. And Helga said, well, I gathered from what she said, that, well, it's being discussed and we're trying to figure out what to do about it. But that's not the answer that will solve the problem. I would like to, there is a point at which someone who gets injured on the job, they go on being paid, but it's not by the job. That's why we have workman's compensation insurance or disability insurance, because that's a separate category. The money for police patrol officers has to be available for officers who can actually patrol, not people who are sick. So from what Mr. Zadnik has said, I do not understand what Helga said. I do not understand. And I'm glad that Peter Mark drew attention to the question. I would like to reiterate the question. When does someone who is disabled stop being paid for the job that they can no longer do because of their disability? I think that's the question that I would wish the council would be answering or trying to find out how to get the answer. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Rothman. Do we have any anyone else on Zoom?
I see none.
All right, we'll close the public record and just bring it back. Let me, if I may, ask a question of staff, probably anyone who's capable of answering. Is there any more that we can understand or say about the current financial burden of having this officer who's on long-term sick leave? Or have we discussed it? Because I think we've, and some of it's probably private, I would think, but is there any more to know about that financial burden and how long it's going to last? Or do we have to make this judgment tonight based on the information that we have?
Yeah, I think it's the latter, Jim. We do have to make a judgment call. All I can say is that we're working with workers' comp for that particular individual and determining whether or not they stay on or, or they leave the department. That's as much as I can say at this point. And unfortunately, I can't tie that to a timeline because we don't know at this stage.
But Robert, to be clear, you only qualify for workers' comp or disability if that is caused by on-the-job injuries, correct?
Correct.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, my guess, and I'm not speaking on behalf of the city. You spoke appropriately. I would imagine it's a combination of doctor determination, union negotiations, and settlement issues that are coupling this to make it undetermined how long this will last. That would be my uninformed sense of that.
I think in general, I can say that it could be anywhere from, once, if it is determined workers' comp, then it could be anywhere from 6 months to like 4.5 years that they could be on the books. It just depends on the circumstances of the case and what it is determined. So.
And at the same time, is it right? We just don't have any more information right now about if or when this officer who's on sick leave would return to work.
That's correct.
All right.
I'm still very confused. So Helga, you're saying hypothetically, this officer could be on our books fully loaded for 4.5 years and not at work?
Well, no, they would be under workers' comp, but there's a lot of different factors that go into that and how it relates, and safety officers are handled a little differently than non-safety personnel. So it depends on the type of case that the particular individual has.
Right, but assuming the person qualifies for, and there's no, that they qualify for workers' comp, once that determination is made, they move off of our books, correct? And our premiums go up, but they're off our books.
In theory.
Sorry?
They could in theory.
But when you say they could, but they might not? Meaning, oh, they would in theory. Okay. Thank you.
And just to clarify the math, I think Mr. Rothman, I just want to make sure I have this right. Mr. Rothman was referring to being at 4 officers. The fact of the matter is, with this proposal, given the other officer that recently was hired, and with this proposal, we would return to 5 patrol officers plus the chief, right? And then If this officer is on, out on sick leave return, that would be a 6th patrol officer plus the chief.
So at that point, we would be fully staffed or a full department at 7. We referred to that 7th officer position as being deferred. That's what the reference is there. It includes the chief as well.
Right.
Helga, can I ask an additional question? Within our 5-year budget planning process, how far out does that deferral go? Meaning, when have we started budgeting in for that 7th headcount?
And we did not include a 7th officer in the 5-year.
So we have no funding for a 7th officer. Okay, 7. Yeah, thanks.
All right. Let's, Vice Mayor Mark, can I ask you to start?
Sure, yeah. I'm really split between two minds on this. One is I understand the hiring environment and the opportunities to hire police officers. You don't want to sort of not take it when you have that chance to do so, especially in this county. So that would, from a management perspective, dictate that when you have the opportunity to hire someone and you don't want to have constraints to do so. You mentioned in your report, Robert, that Tiburon PD has agreed on a short-term basis to help lessen the staffing shortfall. And I see this as an opportunity to explore that relationship a little bit, to see if there's more opportunity there to have a semi-formal, not so much short-term coverage perspective there. I think it gives the city some flexibility and some opportunity to look at that going forward. And so that's where I'm split on that, because I see that this is albeit forced, but an opportunity to develop that relationship should they be willing. And I don't know that they are, versus not having that other than just a short-term incidental coverage and going the hiring route. So I'm split there and can see it both ways. I see a recommendation and generally speaking would support it, but I would be curious what other council members say in relation to further exploring that relationship with Tiburon because of the uncertainty relative to the financial impact of this long-term disabled gentleman or individual now and into the future. As Helga points out, it could be a fairly long future. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Cooper?
Now you have me mixed up, which is easy to do. Are we discussing how many officers we have, or are we discussing not funding these 3 things?
We're proposing to, the proposal is, and the resolution is drafted, to authorize the hiring of 1 officer.
1 officer.
And then to pay for that by
doing this.
by
Okay.
not doing these 3 itemized projects, which this fiscal year will clear up enough money to pay for the officer for the balance of the fiscal year.
Right.
Yeah, we're authorizing the hiring of a officer to replace the officer on long-term disability with an uncertain future of when that person will come off that disability and when they come off our budget in a sense.
I thought we were hiring someone because somebody left.
That's a separate issue.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Is it
Well-
a separate issue though? The point is we're at 3 full-time patrol officers plus 1 officer out on sick leave.
But that's what I asked, opening this conversation. There are 2 open positions. I'm sorry, there's 1 open position right now and 1 position that's not being served because the officer is on disability. The position that's open, the officer who went to Novato, I believe you said, is being replaced. And separately, there was an email about that today, I believe, that identified that officer who will work and begin work, but there's some classification and training aspects to it that will be not fully functional to your department until February, and that coverage can happen through Tiburon and other means. You're asking to populate the other position that the officer is on disability, recognizing that there's no budget for it, and here are ways to pay for it in this fiscal year, but that there will be additional needs in subsequent fiscal years to pay for this position because there's an undetermined future as far as how long this person on disability will be on our rolls, for lack of a better way of describing it. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Yes.
Good summary.
Very good summary. Thank you. Well, I guess my other question though is is there a point now that we have found 300,000 extra dollars in making these cuts, considering that the solar and EV charging most likely isn't going to happen this year anyway. So that wouldn't really have an effect on this year's budget because it would have been there anyway. And then it seems silly to take away, I mean, I would hope that we would do city hall renovations anytime we needed to, because this is a building that, as we all know, you don't want to let something lapse. And I don't know anything about if the courtyard needs the painting or whatever, but I'm assuming it's necessary. So I guess I don't know what, are we amending this? Would we amend this? Would we just say no to all of it, but yet we want to have the officer because now we have the other money? I guess I'm just confused on what
Yeah, I
what
think
we'd be voting on.
If you don't mind, I think the question is do we authorize the city to go above and beyond their budget by $136,000 in fiscal year 23-24, knowing that they've identified a way to pay for it, and we've also identified more funds this
Okay.
evening that they can pay for it. But as Councilmember Wilkinson pointed out, this becomes an ongoing budgetary responsibility beyond 23 and 24 that we haven't planned for. So certainly there's more funds with this 138 plus the amount that was identified that you could in theory roll over, but it's a $202,000 each and every year, potentially, as Helga points out, for another 4.5 years or 3.5 years. And that's the question: do we make this commitment to an individual on a full-time hiring basis, fully loaded basis, or do we find other options like a contract basis with Tiburon, for example? And that's what I identified as sort of I'm split on both ways to do so. And I think I've introduced the second concept more, the contract. It's the first that we've been asked to approve tonight, in theory, and how to pay for it is what Helga's identified as the way to do it, at least for this year.
So I guess I have one more question, which for Chief Wu, when you gave your report, and there were, I don't remember the number now, several hundred phone calls in 3 months that were citizens calling in. Are those calls that could go to the sheriff's department, or are they all emergency calls, or could they go to a fire department if necessary versus the police department? Or is it, I mean, it always seems like every 3 months you give these huge numbers of people just calling the police department, but are they like, help me get up, or are they, I'm dying, please come and save me?
Very good question. Thank you very much for the question. It actually varies, and this is why I've always said that the uniqueness of the Belvedere Police Department is we truly do deliver a very concierge level of police service that's unlike anywhere else, and therefore that our philosophy of no calls too small really stands true, and so as such, people do call the PD for anything. We're the only entity that's 24/7. So even if there's tree down situation in the middle of the night, they call the police department. Certain calls do not automatically get routed to the fire department unless it's medical or fire related. And with regards to other jurisdictions, they are under no obligations to respond to Belvedere.
Right. So we have a boutique philosophy, but we don't have the money to support the boutique philosophy, is what it sounds like.
Again, this is our most of calls of service are resident driven, and it runs the gamut from very simple quality of life issues up to burglaries and assaults and thefts. And that's why it's reported on a quarterly basis,
Right.
the type of crimes that we really do handle.
Okay.
Yeah, I will point out too, I know there's some comments about potentially partnering with Tiburon on a more formal basis for coverage. I know Jason and I have had at length discussions, at least initially, about what something like that could look like. Tiburon has graciously been helping us out and covering some of the overtime shifts. Their staff is already working full-time, but on an overtime basis, they'll come to Belvedere to pick up those empty shifts, so to speak. Again, I feel like, we are wearing out our welcome. I don't think that that's something that we can presume that will continue until, let's say, February, until that next officer is able to be independent and provide some relief. There may be, Peter, to your comment, there may be an opportunity for us to, iron out a more comprehensive agreement, but I don't think it's going to be the same situation where we wouldn't have to hire an officer. It would be some kind of a consolidation of the police departments. They've long advocated for that. And this issue of consolidation comes up, I don't know, every decade or so. So I think that'd be the direction they'd be pushing for, in lieu of some kind of a response agreement to come to Belvedere only when necessary.
Yeah, I think on the one hand, Councilmember Cooper's comment is something that really should be looked into a little further with regard to whether part of the burden on the police department is for these concierge type services. I am a firm believer in community policing, and I think and thank Chief Wu for really developing that ethic within the police department. But I do wonder whether some of the calls that the police take just because they're the only ones available all night could really be directed to voicemail to the city. I wonder whether the hundreds of such calls per quarter are really not properly addressed to the police department, and whether that's putting an undue burden on our excellent officers. Then to Councilmember Mark's comment, I hadn't really thought about this before, but I think it's a point very well taken, that either we could continue to discuss this with Tiburon for a few months, or perhaps even the Sheriff's Department. From what I understand has happened is that part of the problem we're in right now, being down to 3 officers, is that we have hired someone who's not able to start work right away. So doesn't seem to be a permanent problem. And I wonder whether we could solve the staffing shortage in part by prevailing upon Tiburon or the Sheriff's Department. I don't know if that's available for officers that could help until our new hire is able to be a fully active officer and member of the force. My concern about what we're being asked to do tonight is really what kind of commitment we could make to the individual we would hire. Obviously, if we hire a lateral, we want to get the best person possible, and the best person possible would not want to have an uncertain future. And so I'm a little concerned about offering a job to someone and then saying, but, we don't really have the money, so we might have to lay you off. I can't imagine that we would get a top recruit from that. So those are my concerns about tonight, and I wonder whether there's some way we could solve this relatively short-term problem, October through January or February, with some short-term agreement with one of our neighbors.
Right. So the issue right now is staffing availability countywide. Countywide, there are approximately 43 to 44 vacancies for law enforcement personnel. And so when I reached out to our neighboring jurisdictions, they don't have any staff available to assist. Tiburon is the only entity at this time that they're fully staffed. However, being fully staffed also means that they get to enjoy sending their personnel to training, to account for vacation, and also to account for sick leave and other emergency, which at this time we do not have to look, excuse me, that we do not have the luxury of. So in short, the other jurisdictions are also short as well.
Helga, can I ask a question? How long is this uncertainty regarding whether this officer qualifies for disability likely to last, which would then provide greater clarity, presumably, on how long this person will be on our books?
We should probably know something next week or a little bit after that. Right, Robert? So.
Yeah, I think by the next couple of weeks, certainly by November, we would have a pretty good indication of which way it was going. And how long that person would be, like you say, on the books or off the books. We don't know at this time, and my hands are kind of tied, at least on what I can speak about on this issue right now. But it could be, like Helga said, it could be a short-term solution, a short-term remedy, so to speak, done in a few months, or it could be something that, in the most extreme case, would be drug out for several years, 3-4 years. I think that, however, is unlikely. The latter.
Robert, can I, Jim, if you don't mind, can I touch on the officer numbers again?
Sure.
I mean, there's 3 officers in-house right now, not including Chief Wu.
Yes, that's correct. On the books, though, there's
No,
4.
I understand operating. There's the 4th gentleman first individual who is on long disability.
Right.
Your last paragraph of your staff report on page 1, you identify this individual is just the person you just hired. That's who we received a notice of this morning, I believe, or yesterday.
Correct.
And she will begin working in mid-October, but certification and training will keep her, in a sense, off our streets until February.
Correct.
So we actually need to replace 2 positions to keep yourselves fully staffed until February, meaning this person with temporary assistance and the person who is out on disability as well. Otherwise, you have 3 and you need 5 for sufficient coverage.
Correct.
So we're already planning to supplement your force with Tiburon's officers in an overtime capacity until February for this position, no matter what.
Or our existing staff would be able to.
Or they could work more themselves, to be sure. And that you're hoping with this authorization to hire someone, hopefully to bypass in a lateral move this training in a way to not have this same 3 to 4 to 5 months of gap in there. The question is, you figured out how to pay for it this year. We potentially identified rollover money from this even for next year, but long-term, given the uncertainty of the long-term disability, that's the question.
That's correct.
Okay, so it's 3 right now, 4 on the books, but 3 operating. And so you're fulfilling 2 positions. You're looking to temporarily fill 2 positions until this person comes on and this recent hire is fully certified in February.
That's correct. And the other point, maybe it's not clear, just from an operations standpoint as well, if we continue status quo with what we currently have, our functioning as a police department is with the assumption that everyone comes to work and is happy and healthy. In our current model, if an officer decides that this is too much overtime, I need to leave, or I'm going to take an early retirement because I don't need this, that could put us in an even worse situation. To Jason's point, which he's made very clearly to me, and certainly what I've heard from the PD, is they're concerned about that type of scenario.
And just to highlight that, I mean, you have, correct me if I'm wrong about this, you have 3 shifts a day times 7 days a week is 21 shifts. And if you're 3 officers, that's 7 8-hour shifts a week. So that's a lot. Right. So that's why the 4th officer and the 5th officer make that much more reasonable 35 to 40-hour week.
Right.
Got it. Thank you.
Mayor Lynch, I have one more question. So you have identified you've identified sources of funds, deferring other projects and like outside of the police department. But looking at the budget for fiscal year 23 and 24, the overall police department budget is 1.7 million for 23 and just about the same amount for 24. Is there any place, and I don't have the question does not assume an answer, but I think it's worth looking at. Is there any place within the police budget that you could also redirect any funds to the extra officer? And I'm not asking for line item at this time, but I put that out for sharp consideration over the next year. If we were to fund an additional officer for a year, whether a close look at some of those other estimations and expenses might reveal some flexibility there that would give the new hire more confidence in the commitment. Let me put it that way.
We have looked into what's available in the current PD budget. There is a temp and part-time line item. It has $30,000 in there, and we only spend about $8,000. It's for our part-time police officer. And so we do believe we could redirect like at least 18 or 20,000 of that towards a police officer position.
Thank you. That's just exactly the kind of thing that I was thinking about, and I'm glad that you're already, I should expect you're already on it, but it's worth having as part of the public discussion.
Councilmember Wilkinson.
Okay, I'll weigh in a little bit. So and we've been talking for a while about the fact that we are reaching a place with our city government that we can't afford to do things anymore because our fire budget costs us too much and our pension costs are going up too much. And so we can't afford to do things anymore. And we can only afford 6 headcount, not 7. And that's why we don't budget for the 7th headcount. And with lots of different ways, we found ways to be able to create money for this position for 1 year. I don't know that we can do that for next year if that were to continue, because next year we know our pension costs are going to go up because of CARPA's losses. We know the fire budget's going to go up. We know that we owe Tiburon Fire Protection District 300,000, is it, of money that we haven't paid them. And those are additional constraints on our budget that we haven't even priced into that 5-year model. So we're going to be overcommitting ourselves here on a medium-term financial basis. So I don't know how you, in the same place as Peter, I don't know how you fix all of that, because we obviously would love to be able to offer residents a concierge police department, but we're reaching the point where we can no longer afford to do that, and our residents do not want to pay more tax. So I understand for lots of reasons, including staff morale in the police department, that it's important to fund this position. And so my sense in all of this is that my vote would be a reluctant yes, because I think it's important to do that and to make sure that we do that for now. But if we are in a situation in 6 months' time where we find out that we've got this extra police officer who either has come back to work from sick leave or is on our books for many years to come for other reasons and is not working, we will have to make some really difficult financial decisions in other areas or possibly within the police department. So it's a really difficult situation that we're in, and I think it just is beginning to highlight the financial stress that the city is under, and that will continue to grow in the years ahead. But my vote for this would be to approve this hiring. And I don't think we need to cut back on these projects listed here because we've just made savings on the on not funding the project outside of City Hall. So that would be my vote.
Thank you. I appreciate all the comments, and I especially appreciate Councilmember Wilkinson's comment. This really does put a bright light on the difficulty that we're having and the constraints that we operate under, and the tests that we have to put ourselves to, and that our community has to put itself to in figuring out what it really wants to pay for. And Vice Mayor Mark's comment about trying to figure out, we're living in a laboratory right now where we are short of officers and we're short on money, and we're scraping and coordinating with Tiburon PD to try to figure out if this can work. We should also be trying to assess whether the public cares, right? I mean, we may find in this circumstance that we did not invite, but we're living in, we may find as an opportunity to study what the effect on our community is from reduced police staffing. Does anybody know that we're down to 3 patrol officers from 5? And really, it used to be 6, and we've been deferring that for 3 years. What coordination and cooperation are we able to get from neighboring jurisdictions? Appreciating Chief Wu's point just a moment ago, that the answer is essentially 0. But we might, we're in this circumstance. I think we ought to be using it to learn as much as we can about how valuable the concierge service is to our community, and where they're willing. And if it is as important as it has appeared to have been to this point, what they're willing to give on, because that's what we're looking, this is real time looking at how you move dollars around in a budget to figure out how to pay for something that is not allocated. I want to just say one other thing. In here, there's a couple of times, including in the resolution, that funding this additional officer is not a commitment to lift the officer deferral that we've been operating under for 3 years. And I take that as it's written, but economically it is, right? Because if we have 3 patrol officers now, we just hired 1, we get this one, that's 5, but we're still paying something for the officer who's on sick leave. And I don't know if we're paying full freight or what. Are we paying a full salary for that or some portion?
Currently we are.
Right. So
that position.
if we hire this person, we authorize this, we will have rolled back the deferral because we'd be paying for 7 officers, including the chief, six plus the chief.
Correct. Yeah, I would know that on a temporary basis until the future is known for that one particular officer, whether or not he stays or goes off the books.
Right. And so I take the point that we're not making a commitment to have a full 6 full patrol officers, but economically, that's what we're doing.
Precisely, yeah.
You have explained correct that if for financial reasons we could not afford, we ended up with a headcount of 7 and we could not afford 7 beyond this year, we legally would be allowed to reduce that headcount to 6.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay.
All right.
Well, if I can, just on that point, which Sally just mentioned, and I think Councilmember Wilkins, Kevin Sir has a very good point about this, and I would hate to have any sort of documentation in this meeting and not the full-throated endorsement of if in fact we move forward in this way, that that money will be there for this officer, because you don't want to go into negotiations and a discussion with a potential hire that money may not be here in 18 months. I would imagine that the hiring environment is such that, and the turnover, that it's a short-term problem, but we would never want to state that this position is conditional or it's subject to determination of funding. I would just like to get that on the record, because you would want to be armed with that information if you are in fact making this hire. Sorry about that. Thank you.
The last thing I would say is just to echo the comment from Councilmember Wilkinson that if we were to authorize this position, and I can support it for the reasons that have been said, we can change the resolution. I'm not even sure we need to identify where the funding comes from. Or do we, for budget purposes?
The resolution itself would have to have the accurate budget projections on there, where the money's coming from, where's it going to. I would think that's something that we could do on the back end, though, collaborate with staff. You would just make the directive that we have the money come from a different source than what's currently presented.
And do we have to identify that source tonight, or can you guys look at that and make that part of the resolution?
Well, I think the only other source that we're talking about is from those capital funds for
Capital funds from the San Rafael City Hall project that was
yeah,
discussed
ADA City Hall as
previously.
well.
But does that make a difference to you guys? I mean, if the $1.38 or the $1.03 for the EV charging is said is something you thought you weren't going to be able to do this year anyway.
That's correct, yeah. I think you could do it both ways. If we end up deferring all of these projects, and we'll have more money, obviously, at the end of the year, that would be considered for rollover or funding this position in the future.
One point I would make, and I think Helga will back me up on this, is that we're very early into the fiscal year, and there's always every year lots of unanticipated expenses that come later in the year, and usually revenue exceeds forecast as well. And so we're putting up a lot of additional money early on in the year for this position. So the idea that we'll necessarily have this 300,000 available by the end of the year, that might have had to be appropriated for something else by then.
That's correct. That could happen.
How difficult from a hiring perspective, Jason, would it be to delay this decision a month or two until we have clarity on what happens with?
That is, it's not a simple answer that I can provide because for example, the risk is having uncovered shifts. Right now, within the department, we have restructured to minimize these uncovered shifts, and the rest of them we're relying on Tiburon to cover. But that doesn't also count the fact that maybe our staff may come ill, injured, or family emergencies, and same thing with Tiburon. So it's kind of hard to say.
It seems to make sense to leave, I mean, certainly, as you mentioned, the 103 is already there. The 35K, you may have, as Commissioner Kmitzer pointed out, you may have 18 to cover that right there. So, I mean, I would think for resolution purposes, if it needs to be there, just leave it there. And then if you need to change it, come back with a consent item in the future to modify it. It doesn't seem like, we're talking about the 35, we're not talking about the 103.
That makes sense to me, and I would entertain a motion on the resolution as it's drafted with the allocations identified in there.
I'll second that, if that's an actual motion.
I just made the motion. I'll take a second. Thank you. We'll take a vote now. All in favor, aye.
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you, everyone.
Yeah, thank you, Chief Wu.
Complicated discussion, but thank you, Chief Wu, as well. That brings us to the last item, which is the open forum, an opportunity for anyone to briefly address the City Council on matters that do not appear on the agenda. Is there anyone in chambers who would like to speak during the open forum? Seeing none. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone on Zoom?
We have Mr. Rothman.
Thank you. Mr. Rothman? Mr. Rothman, if you're speaking, we can't hear you.
Can you hear me now? Can you
Yes,
hear
we
me?
can.
Oh, thank you very much. I'd like to say two things. One is that I really have such admiration. I mean, sometimes I disagree with what you do, what the conclusions you come to or whatever, but the amount of work that you and all of you on the council and staff put into things is really, it's just so admirable. And I appreciate it very much. And I hope the other residents also all appreciate it. But one other thing I wanted to say, I think there may be a source of some additional money coming. Hooray, hooray. And I think that that could come because of the state law that now prevents the property taxes from staying the same when someone dies and gives their house to their children. Because sometimes then the children will move in, but the taxes don't go up at all. That's the way it used to be. But as you know, that's gone away now. When the person dies, the place gets reappraised. Others of the children, and I know it happened on my street, they would rent the place out afterwards. And these people did it for about 12 years before they finally sold it. And only when the kids sold it, did the property taxes go up. But now with that adjustment in the state constitution, more people when the parents die are going to be selling the house. And then there'll be, because the people were old, the house was previously assessed for a much lower amount. I think you may see more money coming in to the city from the property taxes. And I'm sorry the people die, but that's a positive thing for the financial status of the city. I hope it works out. I just wanted to bring it to your attention. And also, as I say, thank you very much for all the very hard work that you do. Thank you.
Thank you. Madam Clerk, do we have anyone else in the open forum?
Mayor Lynch, I see none.
All right, we'll close the open forum and we are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.